And going to the other side of the country, I'd like to bring up my good friend and our final speaker from the great state of California, Mr. Doug LaMalfa.
Yeah, thank you. In addition to all those oranges and horses she has down there, I'm also really excited about her representation of the original swamp rat, the greatest drag racer ever, Don Garlitz, down in her district there. So I come from Northern California. We have some of the most craziest regulations there. Simultaneously, in what is the current California, we have a drought emergency and we have a flood emergency. Can you imagine that? It's because we've had a lot of rain lately, and due to regulation, we're not as prepared for it with our levees, our water handling systems. Instead, we get our water taken away from us in agriculture. This in the time where we got $7, $8 dozen eggs. In the west half of the valley I represent, 250,000 acres of land were left out because of no water. It was indeed directed to other uses due to biological opinions and other things made by bureaucrats that don't really seem to care about what the people need in this country, in my home state, in agriculture and whatever. So Waters of the United States is yet another overreach that was pushed back for a while. It's alive and kicking once again and going to put people out of business, make food less affordable, less available for so many people, all because they want to regulate every single mud puddle, the water coming off your roof into a rain barrel, a man-made ditch in a drainage or an irrigation district. They believe it all belongs to them. And that's not the case. These are property rights that are in peril, and these are the people's needs that are in peril for their ability to afford what they need to do to put food on the table. And for the farmers that we're still going to need, unless we want to import all of our food, which works really great when you compare that to imported energy. So we have to rein these people back, because a lot of times when you're trying to get answers from them on how to deal with this regulation, they're not even at work. They won't even answer the phone, so we can figure out what the blank we're supposed to do with these people. I appreciate the time. Kat, thanks so much for taking the reins on this issue.
Unanimous consent to address the House reminder and provide.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I was home over the weekend, saw a lot of folks in the district, and they're baffled by the handling of this Chinese spy balloon situation. Regular folks are wondering, why in the world was this thing handled or not handled the way it was? Why was it allowed to travel across the entire of North American continent through the NORAD system, from Alaska through Canada, down through our Midwestern states, and finally exiting at Carolina? Why wasn't another way found to bring the balloon down slowly? Maybe just a couple of bullet holes in the balloon itself instead of allegedly $1 million missile hitting the spy array, so there's not going to be any evidence as it got dumped into the ocean. There's a lot of questions to be answered about this, and we're not getting very good answers out of the military, out of the White House. Now, tomorrow night, the president's going to be standing about 10 feet away from this spot right here. I hope he has some really good answers on what our air defense system looks like in this country, how much spying is allowed to go on by balloons, for crying out loud. We know the satellites are up there and stuff, but this is a breach of the trust of our country, and we're looking foolish around the world by allowing this to happen. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from
Malfa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd tell you one thing. If Congress was writing this legislation now the way there's folks trying to interpret Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, there's no chance it would pass Congress, certainly back in the 70s, nor now, because people would be calling for the heads of the members of Congress voting for such a far-reaching, overreaching piece of legislation. So here we are. Something was passed in the 70s that has been interpreted and reinterpreted more recently in the Obama era under WOTUS. Went very far-reaching to mean that human-built drainage ditches and agricultural irrigation ditches are now under the scope. We see areas that want to regulate water running off your roof into a rain barrel, saying you can't keep that rain barrel water without some kind of permit because it belongs to someone else. It seems the scope has expanded so much that no drop of water anywhere doesn't belong to the United States. So let's talk about home building for just a little bit. And also I want to touch too that Army Corps is holding up a project in my district for 3 years because it's about a half a mile from a river. So hearing Mr. Owen mention that one of the test questions is, can you avoid building this project? Can you avoid it? Well, no, I own this piece of land right here, private property. I want to build my building here, not have somebody ask me if I can avoid building it. I need it to store my equipment in or build whatever it is. So I want to come to, let's see, sorry here. Ms. Huey, you mentioned in your testimony, there's basically 2 tests, I think as you put it, on when you go to build a house or housing project. One was stormwater runoff. What was the second one? Yeah, there was two pieces in line before you even get to water quality. So
I'm sorry, you're talking about the fill material.
Pardon?
Fill material.
Is that it? Okay. All right, so there was two pieces you would have to certify before you can get going on a project there on fill material, right?
I think it was that you were subject to 404 and then also stormwater controls.
Yes.
Okay, 404. All right, thank you for that. So you've already got a big lift in order to build any kind of housing project with those. And what are the timelines to get through those two types of permits to build housing?
In my area in Alabama, it takes us several years to get through those processes.
Several years.
Yeah, and then there's even more layers after that. Once the development starts, we have, in Alabama, it's the Alabama Department of Environmental Management that we have to go through, and then the municipalities that come through every month and make lists of things that we need to correct, from silt fence to if we've got a pile of dirt that we've moved that it needs to be seed and hayed, and if it's not, if we don't get it taken care of in a couple of days or a week or so, and that's when we have 3 detention ponds on a piece of property as well. Those detention ponds for a subdivision I was in about 4 or 5 years ago let the water out in an 18-inch pipe. And now a development that I'm somewhat involved in, we have to hold the water on the property for 24 hours, stormwater, before it's released.
And so what's the process of having to build the retaining ponds? Do you have to get permits for that? Because I know farmers and ranchers too, and sometimes they can't obtain those because you're somehow changing the watershed. How is that for you?
Right, we used to could fill out the forms to do that. Now we have to hire an environmental consultant, and that could be $5,000 to $10,000. The detention pond itself has cost about $100,000 on the project that I'm working on now.
To make a retention pond in order to do what they want to do so no silt gets away.
Yes, sir.
Because this is primarily about silt. When we're talking about pollutants, you seem to have plenty of regulations on how to use ag chemicals, farm chemicals, other things that are in a factory setting someone's regulating all that effluent, what's coming off there. So when I hear talk of that 50% of his agriculture, what we're really talking about is silt. And so if you go to any river upstream of agriculture after a heavy amount of rain, you see an awful lot of brown water coming down the rivers. It isn't fault of a farmer somewhere. And also you see that up in my district in Northern California, if they're successful with their extremism of tearing out some hydroelectric dams we need for electricity, we're going to release at least 20 million cubic yards of silt down the river. Now, silt is bad for gold mining and all that sort of thing, bad for fish, for turbidity, except we had a high-ranking official at a recent hearing say, well, the river is very starved for silt. So I'm wondering what the hell anybody's supposed to do, how any farmer, how any homeowner is supposed to figure out how to navigate this when it takes so long to get a permit to build a pond or anything else. 3 years. 3 years for this farmer in my district to want to build a building that he can't avoid building. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Stanton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Water is.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last 2 years, the Biden administration has consistently waged a war on American energy and our fuel sources. This unscientific, ideologically driven assault has crippled the American energy and hurt American families and our economy greatly. The American economy, our way of life, is dependent on reasonable, reliable, and easy access to energy. He's gone so far as to even deplete our strategic petroleum reserve. As you see here, these numbers going down dramatically in order to cover over this bad policy and make everybody think it's going to be okay. Americans rely on access to low-cost, efficient energy from sources like natural gas to heat their homes, cook their meals, and keep their lights on. It is neither feasible nor desirable for most Americans to abruptly switch to green alternatives such as wind and solar power and have to change all their appliances and yard tools out simply because of the whims of government and having too much time on their hands. Many can't afford to do these changes, nor should they have to. The unreliability of green energy makes it a much less preferable alternative. Faced with the choice between these two, most Americans make the sensible decision to stick with the low-cost, reliable natural gas over expensive, unreliable green energy. In my home state of California, where the electricity power grid in the summertime at any time could go down, yet they're trying to force people into electrifying just about everything, their cars, their stoves, their yard tools, even generators. Now, think about this for a minute. How do you have an electric generator when the power goes off from your electricity? I guess this must mean you have a warehouse of batteries somewhere, because otherwise, I don't know how you do it. Generators are supposed to be a backup plan, so frequently hospitals have diesel generators. People have generators of their own for camping and as well as backup for their homes. But they just keep going on, making up regulations. So faced with these choices, Americans would rather have their own choices. This administration has obsessively tried to ban and regulate Americans off of fossil fuels, off of nuclear power, it seems, until recently when California, hallelujah, decided to extend the Diablo Canyon plant an additional 5 years, which is 9% of the power grid of California. 9%. Imagine if they took that offline like they were hell-bent on doing. And then keeping natural gas as part of the equation. We have so much natural gas reserve in this nation now because of the miracle of hydraulic fracturing. It's amazing what that has caused for us. Radical environmentalists, though, can't take no for an answer. They've done away with trying to argue for their ideas and simply use government fiat, a stroke of a pen, to try and take these things away, including the latest proposal by the Department of Energy to ban gas stoves, which has got everybody all on Twitter right now. Is that really what we need to be focused on right now with the situation with the railroad in Ohio and whatever the mess is we're going to make out of Ukraine, our border, so many other issues? No, let's keep people distracted with this gas stove situation here. So what we have is a proposal by the Department of Energy to do it by the stroke of a pen, by just making a regulation to ban the sale of stoves that don't meet what is called an EL2 standard. They're just going to block the sales of these stoves, which means about half of them that are currently on the market will no longer be available on the market. People will have less choices. It may not fit their style of kitchen, the size of their family. It may not fit a restaurant. It may not fit what you need for a kitchen that helps aid people that are short of food. Soup kitchens. They want to take all these options away simply by a stroke of a pen. People are getting furious over this such. And for families that enjoy the use of that gas stove, they work nice. I have one. I saw First Lady Joe Biden, a picture of her cooking on one in the White House. So where does the hypocrisy end on all this? Evidently, it doesn't end at the White House. It ends at the choices that humans have in this country. So we need to block this EL2 regulation that the Department of Energy is putting out. Yet another thing to try and distract us, I think, from other issues. But it's an important one for people to have natural gas stoves and other appliances that are available to them. And so I sum up on that with the ideal that the only reason we're really doing all this stuff ostensibly is because of CO2. You see right here, carbon dioxide represents 0.04% of our atmosphere, okay? People think from all the hype over CO2, oh my gosh, climate change, it's a religion being pounded away in our schools and our society, and ESG and these corporations all day long. It's only 0.04% of our atmosphere. And so they would have us all live in caves eating crickets because of a
Gentleman's
decrease
time
of
has expired.
0.01% and take away our stoves right on top of that right now. We got to fight back on the DOE regulation. I yield back. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous materials.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I appreciate the time to stand before the House here this afternoon and talk about some issues that are not only important to my district in Northern California, to a couple of our key industries, but really they are important to all Americans because this is a life-sustaining topic we're talking about, and that's food, energy, shelter. So we have that in abundance in California when we were allowed to produce the things that cause those to happen. So in my Northern California district, we have much agriculture. We have also an amazing natural water supply and the opportunities that come with that by harnessing that water supply for food, for water for agriculture, for food for people, for hydroelectric power, to make electricity, keep the lights on in places like this and all over America, to mine the minerals that we need to produce all matter of things. These come from the natural resources we have in Northern California or Minnesota or all over this country. And so we've been successful in developing them and making them real since the founding of this country. We've fallen on hard times more recently, though, with regulations that, although maybe well-founded, well-minded 50 years ago, have been turned on their ear and worked against good management of our forest lands, the extraction of minerals we need to sustain some of the ideals we have going forward for the future, the water supply for agriculture, for this country that has always known plenty, and these days is actually seeing at some points empty shelves in our grocery stores in the United States. It reminds me of a story that when Russian President Boris Yeltsin was visiting this country with President Bush 41, they had gone to Houston, I believe, to the Space Center and had left, and we're driving down the road and he saw a supermarket, and he hadn't been in an American supermarket before. So they wanted to just pop in random with the president, and then with the president of Russia, to see what it looked like. President Yeltsin was amazed by the products that we have on the shelves in American stores. Not only that, but that people were freely and casually purchasing them. Not in a frenzy like, oh, this is the day the food comes in, everybody has to rush in and stand in line and rush out before it's all gone. No, easily coming and going, taking what they need, purchasing it at the register, and walking on out. All variety of the same kind, all fresh, all high quality. And that's what the United States has been able to bring itself to over all these years. And now that seems to be in peril. And a key part of that in my home state of California is that water supply. So I'll touch upon that here a little bit. What we have in the Northern California district that I represent, and also on the Oregon side, which my colleague Mr. Bentz represents above this line here in Oregon, is the Klamath Basin, the Klamath River. Now, that's a natural lake formed at the beginning of time of this planet, but also it's been enhanced about 110 years ago through a federal project. It yielded an additional 7 feet of elevation and approximately 400,000 new acre feet of water supply that was intended when that federal project was built to be agricultural water. So back in 1906 when they created it, it made possible 1,400 farms and 200,000 acres of prime ag land. Under federal law, under the Reclamation Act, and state law, all the stored water, the newly created water, it's called stored water, in the Upper Klamath Lake, which was above the natural level of the existing lake. That was the stored water. So when it is full, again, there's 400,000 acre feet of water, new water, but despite the clear law of the federal government, they've been taking advantage of the farmers year after year by mismanaging the lake and shifting that clear water right, as adjudicated by Oregon courts, to environmental purpose, to other purpose. The water would not exist had not that project been built and paid for over the years by the farmers in that basin. So what do we have? In 2022, the federal government even cut off water that could have gone to finish the crop year. They eliminated 50,000 acre-feet of legally available water to farmers. And the really maddening thing is at the end of the season, there was a surplus of water in the lake above what was needed to sustain what is known as a biological opinion, to sustain the fish needs in the lake as well as what had been sent down the river for salmon needs. There was extra water. We saw it ahead of time, yet they would not yield that additional water so that we could finish the crop year on some of the needed crops that are planted up there. They plant all sorts of things up in that basin. So one of them would be the potatoes that they grow up there. They needed just a couple more weeks of water supply that was available, and instead they were allowed to die off. So a normal healthy potato ended up being about the size of my pinky, and obviously unharvestable and unusable. All because they wouldn't really listen to the projections that there would have been extra water. Nope, they wanted to start their new water year 2023 in 2022 on the backs of a water supply that doesn't belong to the federal government. It's clearly for the farmers of the basin, created after World War I and World War II for returning veterans to be able to set up shop and do that. The federal government made this choice. So what do we see? This during the time for prices of food that are skyrocketing around the country. Consumers are finding these prices going up and shelves becoming more bare more often than we should even see in this country. So what else do we see? Depriving the farms of water. Here's another view of the basin here. A little more close-up of the various sumps and wildlife areas and the farmed land there. Kind of hard to tell from here at this distance, but indeed it's very comprehensive. And it's rather complicated. But you know, smart people have made that work over the years. Indeed, when the farms thrive, also the refuges thrive. So the negative effects have been made that the farms, when they don't get the water, the wildlife refuges in the area also lose access to the water that comes through that ag system and gets to them. In 2020, over 60,000 ducks died in the basin, in that Klamath Refuge, due to avian botulism. I paid a visit up there to folks that were working with voluntarily and through Fish and Wildlife to help try and bridge the gap from the water supply that wasn't there in recovering ducks. I mean, it's pretty terrible to be, this is, I've seen these pictures here, fishing out dead ducks from the refuge. Down here in the bottom, this is one that we rescued that was really sick, but we took back to a center there where they were helping for the ducks that were recoverable to recover and turn them back loose. The picture up here shows just how ugly it is. So a thriving basin is a key part of the flyway all through the western states, including from Northern California on south. The flyway that's so key towards having the type of diversity of wildlife that is enjoyed all through the Sacramento Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, and other areas of Northern California, Oregon, Southern California, for sportsmen, for everybody. It doesn't happen when this is the policy of the federal government to basically take the water away from farms and the refuges. So as I mentioned, as affirmed by the courts in Oregon, where the lake lies, also a portion of the basin's on my side, which me and Mr. Bentz both represent, the stored water is indeed owned by the farmers solely for use of the Klamath project. They've paid for it, they continue to pay for its ongoing upkeep and improvement, even when they don't get the water delivered to them. Isn't that something? You get a bill, that's one thing, to have it for the maintenance and upkeep if you're getting to use the supply, getting to use the asset. They don't even get to use the asset half the time now, but they still get the bill for it. It would not exist other than for that 7-foot enhancement that created the 400,000 acre feet. So in 2022, they were initially going to get 0 water. They did find a way to increase it to 50,000 acre feet after some late storms, which is 12.5% of the allocation of their water right. There was extra water, as I mentioned, in the basin, in the lake, to be used in the basin at the end of the year, above an amount that the environmental biological opinion said had to be remaining in the lake. They chose not to give it out. In 21, they were given 66%, or 33,000 acre feet. In 2020, after some battling, they tried to pull the pin on them early in the spring after the farmers had planted. They did end up getting 140,000 acre feet, which is about 1/3 of their allocation. In 2019, which was an amazing water year in Northern California and other areas, they still received 92% of their allocation. Pretty good by these standards, but it still wasn't 100%. So downstream of that, on the complex Klamath River situation, is also 4 hydroelectric dams that California, Oregon, environmental groups, and others are all been conspiring for a long time to have removed. So think about that for a minute. Especially my home state of California, there's a big push in the whole country to convert everything to electricity in its energy source. Automobiles, you're hearing the big controversy over stoves right now, kitchen stoves. They want to, my home state and some cities, they're really pushing on getting rid of those. Now, most people I know that have gas stoves in their house, they really like them. It's really handy to regulate the temperature, the rate with which the heat comes up on what you're cooking there. You can see the flame. First Lady Joe Biden, there's a photograph of her using one in her own kitchen in the White House. But they want to take this away. It's going to have to be replaced by electrical appliances, electrical automobiles, electric yard tools such as leaf blowers and lawnmowers. I still chuckle at the idea that they're trying to ban in California gas generators. I'll think about that for a minute. A generator is something you use a lot of times in an emergency for a home or a business, a lot of other purposes as well for them, but a lot of people use them as an emergency when the power goes out. Well, if you don't have a gas or diesel powered generator, what are you supposed to go to when the power goes out if you need it turned on? Many hospitals, rest homes, things like that, they'll have a diesel-powered backup generator. Well, they're constantly under the gun by an air quality group, even though they rarely have to use it. It's like, this is not compliant. You need to replace that or get rid of it. So when we keep banning sources that are fuel-sourced appliances like this and turn to more electrification, so where are you going to get the electricity? Especially in my home state of California, which the grid is, on any given hot day, might be on the edge of shutting down. They have arrangements with the power companies that large manufacturers have pre-agreed agreements, I'll say, that they should shut down when the grid gets tough on a really hot day and the electrical load that everybody's pulling is about to break the grid. So you'll have people having to shut down their businesses, shut down manufacturing, shut down a cement plant, whatever it might be, due to a pre-arrangement, because we can't keep the power supply up where it needs to be. And they don't really have replacements. So that's expensive for jobs. It's expensive to stop your business. It's going to be expensive for the ratepayers to have to bear the brunt of that as well, that use electricity other than those businesses. So we want to convert everything to electricity, huh? I mean, we had a last-minute intervention in the California legislature to extend the life of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant by an additional 5 years. They were slated to shut it down, 2 reactors, one in 24, one in 25. That plant alone is 9% of the power grid. How do you take a 9% chunk out of something that is already teetering on the edge of failing? Well, a similar case up here on the Klamath River. The 4 hydroelectric dams, one is on the Oregon side in Mr. Bentz's district, the other 3 are on my side in California in Siskiyou County. They're hell-bent on getting them out. They think they've got it done. Well, we're here to say no, because we need the power supply and many other aspects of those dams that are important for the area. Indeed, the local folks have had 2 different measures in the county on the Oregon side and Siskiyou County on the California side by well over 70%, an advisory vote saying, please keep the dams in place, they're important. Siskiyou County voted 79% for that. This course of action, of course, was based on one single study that supposedly showed that the dams are contributing to high water temperatures and reduced flows, which are causing fish populations in the river to decline, especially the salmon. This is at the same time, okay, you got dams, deep water in them, right? On Lake Shasta and others, Lake Almanor, I think soon Lake Oroville, they're requiring the lake on Lake Shasta to be kept deeper so the water stays colder longer into the year so they can release colder water for the fish in the fall and early winter. So it's all about cold water by keeping the lake deep, but you take these dams out that have water stored behind them, you no longer have that deeper pool of water. They're trying to blame the dams with deeper pools of water for somehow raising the temperature. I mean, both sides of the mouth on these arguments here. This all came from a master's thesis by a government employee, not peer-reviewed. It contained no in-field research. Now, a former EPA science integrity officer, actually during the Obama era, a man named Paul Hauser, he was tasked with reviewing all these efforts for the Klamath Dam possible removal. His conclusion, again, the EPA science integrity officer said it would be the worst of all outcomes to remove these hydroelectric dams. Worst outcome for a lot of reasons, including environmental. The 3 hydroelectric dams are the biggest taxpayers in the county on the Siskiyou County, California side. Removing them will cause a huge hole in the budget of an already struggling county, which has had its timber business decimated, the mining business decimated. These large landholders, these large assets are fairly lucrative for the county. So when you couple that with already expensive energy in California, and probably a lot of the country, this doesn't make any sense. Because this is, green renewable power. When the rain falls behind a dam, that's renewable. Doesn't require a fuel source. That is the fuel source. Yet, of course, in my crazy state, it's not recognized as renewable if the size of the power plant is above 30 megawatts. Doesn't mean anything. But we're all here about, well, we need green power. I guess that can only mean windmills and solar panels. Yet try and get a permit. One group over here, environmental group, says, hey, we want these solar panels. They're the greatest thing. Or the windmills. And the other groups, maybe rightly so, are saying like, well, if we're going to cover 1,000 acres of solar panels, we can't stand by and allow that to happen. It might affect the desert tortoise. Or we know the windmills chop up birds, sometimes falcons, sometimes endangered hawks, even eagles, stuff people care about. And they're not really very reliable sources of power. Indeed, some days in California, because of an anomaly where there might be too much power coming off those grids due to the way the load is managed, they'll find themselves having to pay people to take that power because they can't just easily shut it off. It's strange thinking. I'm appalled that this is the way we've allowed ourselves in California to be forced into by the ideal of green power. So what does that mean? Everything else becomes a peaker plant. Peaker plants got talked about a lot 20 years ago in California, 25, when we had other energy crises. So a peaker plant was supposed to help supplement what the grid might not be fulfilling normally. So indeed, the peaker plants are going to become the hydroelectric plants and natural gas plants because they want to go so far and wide with solar and wind that you can't count on them at night or when the wind's not blowing. Or, funny enough, if the wind is blowing too fast, they have to shut the windmills down. So our electrical situation in the state is already in peril. Removing these hydroelectric dams means about 70,000 homes worth of power goes off the grid, and a whole host of other things. It will destroy the current ecosystem habitat, including some endangered species, the spawning grounds, by releasing, get this, 20 million cubic yards of toxic, some of it possibly toxic material. Indeed, silt. These dams have a lot of silt behind them that's accumulated over the years. They don't really have an explanation for what's going to happen with it or how it's going to be disposed of. They're just going to release it into the river. If you ever hear anybody talk about turbidity from a slight action going on in the river, you got to get a permit to do the slightest thing in a river, whether it's a gravel plant or doing something to clean up the river, having to move some material because of flooding, because of silt in other situations. They have months and months or years to get a permit just to move a little bit of material out. And they say, oh, this is okay. We're going to unleash 20 million cubic yards down the Klamath River. The turbidity, which makes it hard for spawning, it's hypocrisy. So one of the other effects will be lowering the water table underneath the ground or near the dams. They've helped build up the water table. So the underground water table will be negatively affected by their removal. It will remove flood control capability that is important for the communities nearby. The dams are a good way to absorb that water supply. If too much should happen to come from heavy rainfall, they provide flexibility. They remove the ability to control the river and have a flush flow if you need in order to move some material, or should it be for a fish need or other things downriver. That flexibility is taken away by the removal of the dams. Of course, as I mentioned, it takes the hydroelectric power capacity away for the users of the power and those that benefit from the income from it, including the county of Siskiyou. It'll cost possibly the taxpayers of California, who in a water bond put forward $250 million for the tearing down of dams. This is a water bond that builds water supply, that builds water storage, but it had that provision in there. $250 million of California taxpayer money to help tear down the dams. And the ratepayers from the utility, mostly on the Oregon side, also had to front $200 million through a surcharge on their electricity. A total of about $450 million raised. Well, magically, when they were putting forth the proposal to FERC, what it will cost to remove the dams, it came in just under $450 million. Well, they've already wasted about 40, maybe up to $50 million talking about it, so they're down to an amount of about somewhere around $400 million left of that fund. When they remove a dam, they find a lot of things that they didn't count on, including much more silt. And up in Washington, I think it was, they found triple the amount of silt that they had expected. So instead of 20 million, it could be 60 million cubic yards of silt polluting the river for how long? Who knows? How long will it take? The one in Washington, I think, was only about a 12 or 13 mile from where the dam is to the sea, where you'd have to push the silt. On the Klamaths, it's somewhere 120 to 150 miles, depending how the meander of the silt going all through that. And the life cycle of a salmon is 3 years. So will there be enough salmon that make it back through this turbid water over that 3-year period to actually have the species that all the fuss is over? This removal will diminish the value of Siskiyou County property owners by about $1.5 billion, therefore lowering the tax rolls to the county. Electrical rates will have to go up, and the power supply will be even more uncertain. Now, speaking about Mr. Hauser a moment ago and the study he made on removing the dams being the worst option, well, for putting out that truth, he was fired by EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy at the time. So I guess they didn't really want the truth out there. They just wanted one paper that they've hinged all this on since that time. The 20 million cubic yards, which might be triple that, who knows? It's about the equivalent of one dump truck of material every minute of every day for 6 years being dumped in the river. Now imagine the fine if you accidentally put a little bit of silt in the river or a stream, under like waters of the United States, for example, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Imagine how you'd be fined otherwise. for private party doing that. The salmon hatcheries downstream will be destroyed as part of the removal. The salmon hatcheries that we're talking about are responsible for more smolts being raised than actually what the river has ever made. Under one of the dams, there's a ridge, a natural ridge that was there that is much higher than the river level that no fish would have ever gotten over to begin with. They don't want to talk about that because they believe that the fish were getting all the way up the additional 60, 70, 80 miles to Klamath Lake. Bad information. Now they're trying to somehow cover over that in the dam destruction, that they can maybe get rid of that ridge and have it act like it would have been fish passage from the beginning of time. So it will do a lot to hurt the economy of the county, local agriculture, the flood control, many things up in that area. There would be uncertainty when the river system would ever return to normal. It would result at the mouth of the river, at the ocean, underwater contamination at the Humboldt County estuary, which means basically loss of seabed life with all that material now being released, with who knows what's in it. This removal would even cause a violation of the Wild and Scenic River Act. Siskiyou County's governance over water would be lost. What are they going to do to replace the salmon? With the hatchery gone, the actual hatchery that's down below the lowest dam. Of course, the loss of recreation, land value, the lake time use on those lakes, again, tax revenue to the county, and the replacement water. Where the farmers and ranchers going to get that replacement water due to the lower groundwater status? So there's not a whole lot of good that comes from tearing down these dams that were there for a good economic purpose, and actually do have ecological pluses as well. So moving farther south from the Klamath Basin, our water supply in California has been enhanced in the last century by some very forward-thinking projects. The State Water Project in the 50s and 60s, and the federal water known as the Central Valley Project in the 30s and 40s. So joining me here is my colleague from Central California, Mr. John Duarte, who's a farmer down there, as well as a nursery operator of many other nursery crops that we use to grow many tree crops, vines, etc. So the importance of the water supply to agriculture and to the people of California from these projects is incredible. So I'd like my colleague, Mr. Duarte, to offer whatever comments he would like to on this, on the water supply, on how he's been treated by government in his agriculture operations down in his direction in the Central Valley, as well as the portion in my district in Tehama County. Indeed, we have a mass amount of excellent and very valuable crops that are grown in California. Some of them Mr. Duarte is responsible for helping other farmers to have, and even grows himself. I happen to be a farmer in my real life too. And so we see the value of what is grown in California, and that's imperiled by government action. So Representative Duarte, please come on up and offer your thoughts on this.
Well, thank you, Representative Doug LaMalfa, and I couldn't agree with you more. California Central Valley, whether it be the Sacramento Valley where Doug serves and represents, or the South San Joaquin Valley where I serve and represent, is really where America finds its greatest abundance of its salad bowl, its fruit bowl, almonds, plant protein, walnuts, pistachios. California leads the world in production of all of these crops, and it really centers right in the Central Valley. And many of these water resources, whether you're north of Sacramento or south of Sacramento, share the same assets the same infrastructure. So we've, after several years of devastating drought in California that has really hurt farm families and communities up and down our district, has, through acts of nature greatly, but also through mismanagement of our water resources and lack of infrastructure in California, has really cut the abundance that delivers nutrition and affordability to so many American working families who are suffering from high inflation, both the energy costs, their food costs, and in California particularly their housing costs, because we're simply not responding to the needs of our people as we need to. So in the last couple of days, after a very, very wet season and immense hope on the part of our farmers that relief is on the way, they would get water allocations, many farmers in Doug's in my district received a letter from the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau of Reclamation, in spite of historic rainfall, snowpack and flooding throughout California, is warning irrigation districts, farmers and ranchers that they may not get their water and should be prepared for reduced allocations and flow restrictions, which will threaten our food security. Now, these farmers are making plans today to plant rice, to plant tomatoes, to plant cotton, to plant vegetable crops. They're making decisions today as to whether they'll invest more inputs into their almond production, their walnut production, their pistachio production, based on what they think the market will bear for their crops when it's ready to harvest and sell, as well as what water they'll have to see those crops through the growing year with. And today they're getting very, very disturbing mixed messages from the Bureau of Reclamation. And so we should review what some of the facts are that the Bureau of Reclamation needs to look at while warning these farmers that even in this water-abundant year, they may not get their allocations. The current capacity and water outlook at Shasta Reservoir is the big reservoir in California. It's got 6 million acre-feet of storage capacity. Currently, it's at 2.7 million acre-feet, with inflows of over 14,000 acre-feet a day coming in. The Shasta Reservoir has more than 1 million acre-feet in storage this year than it did to this time last year. The current snowpack in California, now we're all waiting for the snowpack to come down and fill the reservoir, but we can model how the reservoir will fill based on the snowpack this year. The Sierra snowpack accounts for 1/3 of California's water supply, and the second snow survey from the Department of Water Resources was conducted on February 1st. So we're waiting with anticipation with what the March 1st Sierra snowpack report will bring, but we know from the precipitation events over the last month, it's going to be substantially higher. Nonetheless, the snowpack as of February 1st of this year was 205% of average up to that date. It contains over 33.7 inches of water, or 205% the average of water content of what we normally have up to that date. We know the daily snow sensor report of February 28th per the California Department of Water Resources shows the snow water equivalent at each of the reporting stations feeding into the Sacramento River, which supplies Lake Shasta. All of these stations are over 100% of normal snow water content. And throughout California, in the same report, there are 131 stations with all but 4 reporting a snow water equivalent percentage higher than 100% of normal. At Mount Shasta, which feeds the Central Valley Project's largest reservoir, Shasta Lake, the 22-23 snowfall is 202% higher this far into the winter, with 97 inches of snowfall recorded. And as of February 27th of this year, just yesterday, Mount Shasta had received approximately 60 inches of snow in the past 3 days. That's 5 feet on top of the snowpack they already had. And yet, California farmers, food producers, the champions of abundance, are being told to keep their powder dry, not expect full water deliveries this year. Now, apparently, we still don't have enough water infrastructure in California, even with Shasta filling up, even with a snowpack set there to completely fill and top up our reservoirs throughout the state. Even after the state failed to pump the Delta and get that water, the flood waters taken out of the Central Valley, out of the Delta, and into storage south of the Delta earlier this year, we're still going to be topped up, and farmers cannot expect full allocations of their water this year. We need to be building dams. We need to be building reservoirs. We don't need to be tearing them down. And what Congressman LaMalfa has presented here today is an absolute insult to every working family in America who's having trouble affording the nutrition on their dinner plate that they could better afford just a few short years ago. This is going to be the first generation in American history, my prediction, where we will see the diverse nutrition of produce and protein taken off the American working family's dinner plate and reverting American families to more starch-based diets that go in the opposite direction of what every health nutritionist tells us we need to be doing with American food plans. So, abundance is affordability. We need a pro-human attitude towards our energy policies, towards our water policies, and towards our food policies here in America. I hope that the leaders the bureaucrats at Bureau of Reclamation will listen to Congressman LaMalfa today and heed his warning, because the American working family cannot take any more of this inflationary abuse of our natural resources. Thank you, Congressman LaMalfa. Glad to be here with you today.
I'm certainly glad you could join, and that you made it as a member of Congress, because you have a great story to tell.
Yes.
As a representative and as a farmer also. So we do have amazing abundant water in Northern California this year, where so much of it emanates and ends up, taking care of our part of the state and other parts of the state as well. With Shasta and Oroville. Oroville, I believe, will fill this year. It didn't look like that maybe a little while back, but it holds 3.5 million acre feet of capacity. It's a good chance of filling. Lake Shasta is a little lagging behind that. But with the snowpack we're looking at, it could top off. It holds 4.5 million. It combined with the proposed Sites Reservoir project down the river would get us that 6 million number. But we have to build Sites Reservoir. It's been looked at for many, many years. It's been planned. The voters of California passed a bond for more. Remember the one I talked about a while ago that's going to use $250 million to tear out dams. Well, it also put forth a good amount of money to add to water storage. And so Sites Reservoir has been able to corral around $950 million of that $4 or $5 billion bond. The rest is going to other projects, it looks like. So we need to get this done. We need Governor Newsom, who expresses support for it, to get his bureaucrats to move on that and get the permits approved so we can start. If we'd had it this year, we would have had that dam nearly full at Sites Reservoir with all the amazing amount of water that we've had. So it's an issue of planning ahead like those before us used to do. So when they built the Central Valley Project, largely Mount Shasta, and the State Water Project, Oroville, and others, the Folsom Lake near Sacramento, it would fill up pretty rapidly this year with the snowpack. So we're doing pretty good. And I have to give credit where it's due. Thank you to the BOR for some of the settlement contractors, this particular group in my area that did get 100% allocation, okay? So they did right on that, based on how things are looking with the supply. But that's a narrow group. When Mr. Duarte talks about others that traditionally have grown 100% of their acres in normal-ish years, they've seen their permanent new normal is going to be 35% on a good year, perhaps. That isn't right. If we plan ahead and build the storage we need, which we know we can, we've done, and the plans are out there to do that. And when the Delta pumps that he spoke about weren't run at max capacity to help fill another reservoir known as the San Luis Reservoir towards the west side of the central part of the valley, that facility holds 2 million acre feet. Right now, I think it's about at 75% full. It wasn't looking so good a while back until we had Mother Nature bless us with so much. But see, they weren't running the pumps as hard as they could. They have other biological opinions to say, well, you can't do this, can't do that. You got so much water in there, I don't see how it's going to negatively affect the fish, except somebody's waving a document saying, no, you can't do that. So we have to flush so much water through the delta that we could be capturing and not hurt a thing by running those two sets of pumps, one federal, one state, and topping off San Luis Reservoir. Now, my neighbors might say, well, Doug, what do you care about San Luis Reservoir? It's way down past us. It can't possibly help us. Well, the more we enhance the supply of the whole state, the better we all are off. I want my neighbors down there to do well. I want my neighbors on the west side of the valley that got zero water. The west side of the Sacramento Valley, basically many, many acres had zero. Some of the districts I mentioned had up to 18%, which in some cases wasn't even usable to them. So we saw dry fields like we'd never seen. And that ruins the economies of small towns. It ruins the habitat for the flyways I mentioned coming out of Klamath. I mean, there's no downside for having more water supply. I just saw recently where the city of Oakland has approved 25,000 new homes, okay? Well, California does have a housing crisis, so we need homes. But where's that water supply going to come from? It will need approximately 12,500 acre feet per year to sustain that amount of homes, if my numbers are right. Where's that going to come from? Magic? They're going to have to take it from somewhere. We need to build the supply so we continue to build the housing we need in the state. So, but John, you know, we both experience this at different parts of the state. We both see that what we're growing here is indeed valuable. These crops that we're talking about here, the country relies on them. Many of these crops, 100%, 90%, 99%, come from California. If we don't have this water, then the United States citizens don't have this food. It'll have to be imported or it'll have to do without. You have to eat something else. Well, there isn't always something else if we're not planning for that. So it isn't just about Californians, a few farmers. It's about everybody. But tell them about what you've had to deal with on just trying to keep your operation going on a wheat field or an orchard, what have you.
So it's interesting at times to understand some of the investigations and things that we need to write new laws for. We claim we need to write new laws because one politician does this or his son does that. I say we can't possibly need new laws to prosecute some of this corruption. I was prosecuted for planting wheat in a wheat field during a global food crisis. My family purchased a property up in Tehama County in Congressman LaMalfa's district, planted wheat where wheat had been grown many times before. The Army Corps of Engineers thought we were doing something different. The field agent drove by and gave it a windshield test and said, hey, you're deep ripping. You're not ripping, cultivating 4 to 7 inches deep. You're cultivating 3 to 5 feet deep. No, we're not. Come out and look at it. Wouldn't come out, wouldn't look at it, wouldn't take our invitation. Next February, he files a cease and desist order and tells us we can't harvest our crop of wheat. We asked for a hearing. The Army Corps of Engineers didn't have time to give us a hearing. Barely had time to drive by and look at what they thought they saw at the windshield. The Pacific Legal Foundation, a pro bono civil rights law firm for many property owners and clients around America, representing the Sackett in the current WOTUS case at the Supreme Court, took up our case as a due process Fifth Amendment case. They can't tell you can't farm your land without giving you a hearing. Well, once that case started to progress forward, the Army Corps of Engineers went to the Department of Justice, and my family and I were prosecuted for planting wheat in a wheat field by the Department of Environment and Water of the Department of Justice under the Obama administration. We ended up never getting a trial. We were found guilty by an Obama-appointed judge in summary judgment. And without a single day in court, we're found to have violated the Clean Water Act because our tillage implement, quote, lifted soil several inches and moved it laterally several inches while entering a wetland vernal pool that had been farmed many times before with the same farming systems we employed. So America's food system is not only at risk because of water scarcity politics here in California or overregulation. America's food system is at risk because we have regulatory agencies waiting with bated breath to prosecute any American farmer that stands up for their property rights, their right to farm, their right to produce food for American families. It's a huge risk. Farmers all over America are making decisions how to avoid these entanglements, avoid a fight, not farm, unless prices are incredibly high, because it's just not worth it. Add in the risk of water supply, add in the risk of inadequate infrastructure, add in the risk of arbitrary bureaucrats making decisions right up until the last minute that affect our ability to plan our farming even for the next year. And our food supply in America is in peril. It's absolutely, unquestionably in peril, and we see it reflected in every grocery store across America today. The food inflation is crushing working families in America. Abundance is affordability. And until we become an abundant society and we understand the farmers, the energy producers to be the champions of abundance, and the regulators, the NGOs that would stop abundance any way they can, to be the lords of scarcity, American working families are going to pay the cost at the gas pump, they're going to pay the cost on their heating bill, they're going to pay their cost at the grocery store, they're going to suffer the housing inflation we've seen in California. In California, a working family is spending 30% of their income on food and 33% of their income on housing. There is nothing left for the other expenses they have in their lives. And this is all due to regulatory overload. We are overburdened by regulations, we are overburdened by restrictions of what we do, and the American working family is paying for it every day. So thank you, Congressman LaMalfa. Thank you for being a champion of abundance. Back in 2015, 16, 17, we were having our battles. Thank you for being here today. You're a friend of not only the farmer, you're a friend of the American working family and affordability and nutrition across the country.
Well, Mr. Duarte, I appreciate you and bringing this sad story forward. Indeed, being regulated for practices that are normal practices that are supposed to be exempt under the Clean Water Act, which was formed in the early 70s, that were reinterpreted under the Obama administration. They decided to reinterpret, and now it's a wider scope. We're having this battle right now in committee on transportation and infrastructure, this conversation where we're going to do a Congressional Review Act on the overreach of the regulation of waters in the United States, WOTUS. It's going to be in the Supreme Court soon. So it's important we get back to a level of regulation that's reasonable. Nobody wants to skirt reasonable environmental laws, reasonable usage of water, all the above. We all get that. But the bureaucracy, as John was saying, is just waiting to pounce upon you and level huge fines at people. He's not the only one in Tehama County that's faced this. I had one grower, this is some years ago, had a clover field that he wanted to re-level, and they show up there and say, oh, you can't do this, and they took at least 3 years, 3 crop years. He didn't need to use his land while the bureaucracy pontificated whether he was doing something right or wrong. I mean, he's owed compensation for that. And others for planting an orchard, changing their ground from one type of orchard to another. That's somehow now a new regulatable situation that is not meant. The Congress would not have had the guts to pass a Clean Water Act that did not have agricultural exemptions the way it was, as it was written. If they had not had those exemptions, there would have been a whole bunch ridden out of here on a rail had they been that abusive of farm policy and agriculture and the food supply. Yet they're getting away with it by a stroke of the pen by a bureaucracy, and it changes from administration. President Trump, he saw the wrong on this, and they were able to put through a modified policy on waters in the United States that actually was working, was reasonable, and Biden pushed it right out. So this is what we face now, is his agencies are pushing this new. Waters in the United States means every drop of water that falls from the sky is under the jurisdiction of the United States. Whether it's a puddle here, he talked about vernal pools, it might hold some water here for a little while. That's going to become a water in the United States. It used to be a term known as navigable waterways, navigable rivers. Well, if you can't run a boat up and down it, it's probably not really navigable, but they've expounded upon this definition so far and so wide that it works for the bureaucracy to be able to attack growers, to attack landowners, fine them, seize things from them. And so the American people should be outraged by this because farmers are just trying to provide. 99% of them are doing things correctly. Yeah, you got your outliers that, try and do things on the edge, but they're caught up with pretty soon, whether it's peer pressure or the regulatory, reasonable regulations that should kick in. They're trying to provide good things for the American people. And they're made to feel like criminals, made to feel like, why should I even bother? So back in the 70s, it was kind of popular to say after the oil embargoes, if you like imported oil, you'll love imported food. Do we want to really rely on some of our same overseas partners for our food supply? Can you imagine trying to, Russia's grown a lot of wheat in the past. Do you want to buy Russian wheat? Ukraine, which is a good partner, you know, it's part of the difficulty of wrestling with that situation. Ukraine is a major exporter of many agricultural crops and fertilizer, and heck, somebody I know had a breathing apparatus that was only made in Ukraine. They had to wait a long time to get parts for it. So, you know, do we want to be reliant upon foreign sources for everything? China for pharmaceuticals? Well, we shouldn't put our food supply in that situation either. And we're on that road to do that due to lack of foresight, due to lack of the water storage. We could be building Sites Reservoir, 1.5 million acre feet. We need to keep chugging water into San Luis Reservoir, which holds 2 million acre feet. We could raise Shasta Dam 18 feet, which would yield 630,000 more acre feet. You know, but this is a representation of the water that was wasted during this winter being allowed to run out the delta. And this is a snapshot in time here. We've got the upper delta running out to the ocean here. 6 million acre feet during that snapshot in time. What are we doing here? We're not helping ourselves. The economy is in a tough way, as Mr. Duarte mentioned. The costs for struggling families, for their housing costs and their food costs, almost envelops everything else. So where's the compassion for the American people on this? We seem to be focused on a lot of other things. You know, there's environmental issues that are brought up, but show me where it actually is going to help the fish in the Klamath River. It isn't. A lot of these other environmental issues, it doesn't really. Since 1992, we've flushed hundreds of millions of acre feet out to the ocean through the delta. The delta smelt is almost non-existent now. They can't find it. When they do trawls for it, they cannot find it. So it's almost like more water has actually harmed that fish. They have other predatory fish that are non-native that are eating up all the salmon smolts there. We don't do the right things about it. We do the wrong things, and it penalizes good, honest, working people that are only trying to provide good things for the American people. So, John, you know, we have to keep telling this story because a lot of folks are just not quite understanding. They don't have time. They're too busy in their lives. And so for those that are viewing this today, I hope you'll take this to heart and have your representatives do things that are going to help our food supply in this country and help farmers, help people that generate electricity. These environmental issues, you only seem to hear one side of it. No, those dams are not bad. Dams are actually created for a good purpose. They don't yield the fish passage that is sometimes advertised. There's other remedies for that, but they're not allowed to come to the forefront. Can we build fish ladders around the dam? Heck, in some cases, they're trucking fish from here to there because of drought situations. So why don't we have alternatives to these ideas? You know, this gets into a very important topic in my area too, forestry. We have overgrown forests that, you know, instead of a healthy 50 to 70 adult trees per acre, they'll have 500, 600, even 1,000 trees per acre. So what's that mean? Well, fire danger, big time. In my district, there's fire after fire. Last year, 2022, we kind of dodged a lot of bullets there. 2021, I had a 1 million acre fire. I've got the poster of it here. You've seen it before. Anyway, it's devastating towards the landscape, towards the habitat, and it also affects the water supply because all this ash and silt washes into the water system and pollutes it. It makes hydroelectric plants sometimes unusable because there's so much stuff that came down from the mountainside into the rivers, into the lakes. We're not managing our forests properly. There's a federal nexus to that, U.S. Forest Service. The pace and scale with which they're doing things is way too slow to keep up with the amount of board feet that are growing every year. So how does that affect water? Not only water quality, but water supply, because the forest is sucking all the water in to have too many trees per acre. What, you want to cut all the trees, Mr. LaMalfa? That's what I hear sometimes when I talk to the urban reporters on it. Like, no, we're not cutting all the trees. We're thinning. We're managing. We're having the amount of trees per acre that are a ratio that's sustainable, that's healthy. And we're not doing that. The trees are out there growing right now. There's many-fold more board feet of trees that are being added to the supply every year than we're even coming close to harvesting. So that shows we're going backwards on that. So the pace and scale with which we manage our federal lands and, of course, allow the permitting on private lands to not cut every tree from here to Oregon, but to manage them. That's the first thing the environmental groups will yell, oh, you guys are going to clear cut everything. You're going to devastate the landscape. Do you think what's happening now is good? A 1 million acre fire. Several of my towns don't exist anymore in Northern California. Many of you have heard of Paradise when maybe you've seen some of those videos where 90% of that town burned down and 85 people lost their lives. Many barely escaped. Town of Greenville, my district, 75% gone. An adjacent town, Canyon Dam, completely gone in minutes. And there's more, up on the Klamath River even. Fire after fire, because our forests are not managed, because federal government can't get out of its own way to aggressively do what needs to be done. We're way behind. So it affects air quality. The air plume, the smoke that went up in a plume from my Dixie fire in my district came and settled over the East Coast. There was so much smoke. And it affected air quality, I believe here in Washington, all the way up to New York. People were advised not to go out and do athletic things because of air quality from a fire in my district. I'm sorry, we didn't want it to happen. But there it was, year after year, fire after fire. And so we need folks to be on our side on this thing. No, we don't want to wipe out the forest or cut down the owl or any of that stuff. The owls actually like a little room to fly between not overcrowded trees. It'll help our water supply. It'll help the health of the forest. It'll help not spend billions and billions in fire suppression every year once we're behind, endangering people's lives trying to put the fire out and flying the air tankers and all that being expended, all that fuel being expended trying to do that, And we're talking CO2. I have a CO2 poster over there as well. Thank you for helping out on that, John. When we're talking CO2, which everybody's scared to death of around here as being the major pollutant, more CO2 is released in those fires than like a year's worth of cars driving in LA, okay? So as this climate change, which is half the time what they're talking about on the other side of the aisle in order to scare people to death, CO2 represents only 0.04% of our atmosphere. And the U.S. is the country leading the way on actually lowering the number anyway. Yeah, we're going to export our jobs, export our industry to countries that are doing nothing about it. China laughs at us as they build another coal-fired power plant every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is. And they'll say, oh, hey, you guys in America, you're not keeping up with the Paris Accords. And they keep cranking out more and more. I mean, it makes us look like a bunch of fools. And this climate change religion they're pushing is going to be really, really expensive. Watch out for these corporations that are pushing what's called an ESG policy. We acted on that this week here legislatively because it's going to make Americans uncompetitive in the areas of energy and everything else. So this is pie in the sky stuff they're pushing here. It's actually very harmful to America, which is always the innovator of the cleanest, best way of doing things. And we're always seeking to improve. We've got the best running car and truck engines, yet it's never enough for the regulators, including my home state, where 70,000 new trucks or currently used trucks up until January 1 now have to be sold or scrapped or something else. And therefore, people don't get the stuff delivered to the stores or their homes that they normally would. It's going to be more expensive. John, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because what we got going in California on these regs is going to be emulated by the rest of the country. I heard somebody talk about the PRO Act here a minute ago. Well, in California, that was a bill that basically makes everybody have to be, instead of an independent contractor, part of a workforce or a union. So, I mean,
Well, the other side of affordability is opportunity. And families can't make ends meet unless they have affordable food, affordable energy, affordable housing. And they can't do the best they can do without opportunity. And until America decides to take practical steps to power our grid, we're not going to have the industrial growth. We're not going to have the worker productivity. We're not going to have the opportunity that American families deserve. And I think Congressman LaMalfa makes a very clear case that other countries are happy to take those jobs, happy to provide their citizens with opportunities that American citizens won't have. As we look at our global food system that's based in California and throughout many states, a global food system will ship food to whoever can afford it best. And the emerging middle and upper classes in India and China, where they're running a carbon economy, where they're creating jobs, where their grid stays lit 24/7 and has plenty of room for industrial growth, is where we're seeing opportunity in work and opportunity in jobs, and it's where Americans are going to see their dinner
The gentleman's
flow
time
to.
has expired.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Doug?
Chair. Appreciate the time today, my colleague joining me. And we just want the American people to pay attention because this affects them. It isn't just for us to stand here and speak.
The gentleman's
for our
time
health.
has expired. Thank you.
California seek recognition.
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Rise and stand, remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, the President's budget proposal was announced. It contains some of the largest tax hikes in American history. If enacted, it would set the corporate tax rate at 28%, a higher level than even communist China. Combined state and federal taxes would amount to 32%. This tax burden will primarily fall on where? American workers and consumers. It's broadly accepted by economists on the left and right that corporate taxes hurt wage growth, with labor bearing as much as 25% of the cost of corporate taxes. Some estimates even place that burden as high as 70%. Raising the corporate tax will hurt American workers, depress their wages, and lower their purchasing power. This is not a pro-growth or pro-worker budget proposal. It's not even serious. The President must meet with House Republicans and negotiate in good faith for spending reductions and work towards an actual balanced budget like everyday Americans do in their homes and their businesses. I yield back.
Thank you. And for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask the unanimous consent to address the
Recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents have a God-given right and role in the raising of their children. When they send their kids to the public schools, they expect the schools to deliver a quality education to their children in order to prepare them for success in the future. Unfortunately, government schools have abused this trust and have been indoctrinating children with far-left lies and poisoning their minds with woke gender ideology. School administrators and teachers unions seem to think they own America's children, that they alone have the right to decide what these children think and believe, and that they alone should be the sole authority in a child's life. Schools across this country have been caught trying to convince vulnerable teenagers that their bodies are wrong, filling their heads with lies and convincing them to see their parents as enemies. This line of thinking is morally wrong. In my own district, a school district is being sued by a parent for secretly changing her daughter's pronouns and identity without her parents' knowledge or consent. Woke administrators have no moral authority to experiment with child's minds in this way. Parents have a moral right to be involved in their children's education and should never be kept in the dark about their issues that their child is going through at school. Congress must take action to enshrine parental rights over their children.
Gentleman, time expired. Does the gentle California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about an extremely important topic that's very current and very disturbing in our nation, in our nation's schools, and the relationship with parents and their kids. Now, during the COVID lockdown, schools were closed, and learning, much of it was conducted online, except for those courageous schools that did manage to stay open and teach their kids the normal way. But during this time, parents gained a valuable opportunity to see firsthand what their children were being taught in public school, and in some cases, what's in their libraries. What they found was very shocking to them. Now, we heard a conversation a bit earlier about, oh, this is banning books. If you see the content that is in some of the books, some of the so-called educational materials, it's really nothing short of pornography that's being allowed to be in there. When did it become okay for kids to be subject to that kind of material, or the performances that are being brought to their libraries under the guise of openness, where it wouldn't be really any different than what is going on in a strip club, that you'd get in big trouble should you take your kid to one of those? How is that allowed to be normalized these days? So rather than teaching children their skills that they need and the knowledge to become successful adults, these activists, whether it's teachers, counselors, superintendents, they're filling their heads with this folk woke far-left propaganda and pushing radical gender ideology on children as young as elementary age. In response to the backlash, teachers and public school administrators have attempted to keep this indoctrination and these agendas secret from their parents. Unbelievable. This included helping encourage students to keep secrets from their parents about hiding their lessons plans, curriculums, trying to ban recording in the classroom, obfuscating what materials were being shown to students, and shutting down parents who spoke out at public school meetings when they'd heard about this, even so far as having the U.S. Department of Justice refer to them as terrorists. They asserted time and again that parents did not have the right to be involved in their children's education. They claimed that once children walk through the schoolhouse door, those children belong to the state. Belong to the state. What is that? What are the echoes of that coming from? In 2021, parents across the country revolted at school board meetings and gathered to make their concerns heard in free assemblies. First Amendment protection. Now, in Loudoun County, Virginia, a father of a young girl who had been assaulted by a biological male was arrested for speaking out against the school board's decision to hide the perpetrator's history of assault against young girls. That decision put his innocent daughter and countless other students at risk. In my own district, in Northern California, a school district was caught secretly changing a young girl's name and pronouns and even encouraging that something was wrong with her body. She was in the wrong body, filling her head with falsehoods. The counselor who encouraged this activity allegedly manipulated the young girl to keep her transitioning secret from her own mother. In both cases, parents rightfully pushed back against these assiduous attempts by public schools to force woke gender ideology on their children. Unfortunately, parents across the country have been met with state force when they have tried to assert their rightful place as the supreme authority in their children's lives. The Department of Justice, again, and famously circulated a memo calling parents who exercise these rights as domestic terrorists. As Americans gradually become aware of the rotten corruption that permeates so much of our public school system, it became clear that congressional Republicans needed to take action to support parents across the nation and enshrine protections against government retaliation. Last Congress, I introduced two bills, one that prohibits doctors from performing gender reassignment surgeries on minors, and another allowed victims those life-altering procedures to sue those who had pushed these surgeries on them as minors. These permanent life-altering surgeries are being forced onto vulnerable children by radical activists. Mutilating a child's body is not medicine, it's not science, it's not affirming, nor is it care. As we've seen in the recent exposure of the inside workings of a Missouri clinic, children manipulated in undertaking these surgeries are not informed about the life-altering damage being done to their bodies. They're being rushed through the process, and worst cases, outright lied to by the people that is somehow going to make their lives better or more in order, and that they know better who should be taking care of them instead of their parents when this harm is being caused. Doing this to a child is immoral, and it should be punished with the full force of the law. Children whose lives are permanently altered due to these surgeries should be allowed to sue for damages and put parents back at the rightful place, their God-given right to oversee their children's education, their well-being, their health, and their bodies. I yield back.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, on Sunday, ESPN celebrated Women's History Month by putting out a tweet celebrating swimmer Leah Thomas. The only problem, Leah Thomas is not a woman. Leah, whose real name is William, is a man pretending to be a woman, ranked like about number 400 in men's swimming, but now about number 1 in women's. This individual, identifying as a woman, was allowed to compete in women's swimming for the University of Pennsylvania. Consequently, this person won a national title that should have gone to a female athlete. Instead of denouncing this farcical nonsense, ESPN decided to celebrate it. It's a sad day for women's sports when our nation's premier sports broadcaster chooses to celebrate biological males competing in women's sports. The evidence is overwhelming that males have competitive athletic advantage over females. It therefore makes zero sense to allow men to compete in women's sports. You call this progress? Certainly not for women athletes. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Panelists, let me just go right down the line real fast. What % of our atmosphere is CO2? Take your best guess. You don't have to be accurate. All down the line.
Repeat that question.
What percent of our atmosphere is CO2, carbon dioxide? Wild guess, it's okay.
I'll bite 5%.
5?
I'll just follow you then.
We'll go 7. That's my favorite number.
I'll see their 5 and suggest that we know that transportation causes 49% of CO2, so that's why we're all working on energy transition.
All right. So what number do you think it is?
5.
5? How about you? I didn't hear you, Mr. Dreyer.
7.
7. Did you have one, Mr. Boyd?
So we got a 5, 7,
This Price is Right.
8. I'm gonna
Okay.
get the high end.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I don't mean to put you on ice. I ask a lot of people that because all we hear is climate change, CO2, CO2. I heard a couple of you on the panel saying you're looking to change your vehicles to electric, even though we don't have the electric grid. And me as a farmer, I wouldn't be real happy about running out and replacing $300,000, $500,000, $1 million pieces of equipment because someone wants it to be electric. The answer is 0.04%. Not 1%, not a half of a percent. It's 0.04%, and it's gone up from 0.03 over the last couple decades. This is what we're being all contorted into doing, is this tiny change in CO2. If we get below 0.02, plant life starts dying off. So let me ask Mr. Boyd, what are a lot of your vehicles Tier 4 already, or the vehicles that you know about in the industry?
Yes.
All right, so that's the cleanest burning diesel equipment you can get, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. How about Mr. Dreyer? What do you think?
Yes.
Okay. So why would anybody be anxious to go out and change out all those vehicles that you've been upgrading? In my home state of California, CARB has eliminated lots of equipment. Trucks, we're down at least 70,000 truckers, and all because they don't make a mandate for a 2011 and newer vehicle. And so it's going to be harder to get things from the ports, all that. So anyway, I just wanted to underline that as we all get all giddy about trying to make everything electric, especially in my home state when they're shutting down the power grid and taking out hydroelectric dams, and they barely kept in place the nuclear power plant for an additional 5 years, which is 9% of our grid. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know how you guys are going to do construction out in remote areas where there isn't power lines yet nearby or what have you in order to charge this stuff. Maybe you'll bring generators. So anyway, thank you for letting me rant on that a little bit. Mr. Boyd, what are some of the challenges of trying to get permits to get stone, sand, and gravel available, especially like in places like California, where just a few years ago, and I don't know what's current now, but in order to get these products into the Bay Area, they gave up getting it locally. They barged it in from British Columbia and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we talked about a while ago on Buy America. Using your district as a great example, if these exclusions are not made on the construction materials end, I don't know how your district's going to get any projects done, just due to the permitting issues that you currently have. You have no other option but to bring it in outside of America.
From somewhere else, a long ways away, a lot longer transportation, right?
Oh, no question.
Yeah. Mr. Dreyer, when we're talking about the Infrastructure Act here, where there was attempts in this committee, attempts in Congress to make it not what it ended up being, at least on the highway section, but get rid of the ability to add highway capacity, downgrading projects, and instead Secretary Buttigieg put in performance measurements to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gas from highway transportation. These are holding up projects. So this was supposed to be in a so-called Infrastructure Act that the president and Democrats pretty much did on their own in the last session. The House Republicans didn't have a lot of opportunity to help shape. So the intent of Congress ended up being, by the time it got through the House and the Senate, to do a bill that would be a little more broad in transportation projects. So give me your interpretation of what we ended up with if we can't add lanes and we can't do the things that are actually going to upgrade infrastructure. You're going to have to go fast. Sorry.
I don't have any information on that question.
No info? Okay. Well, buying again, like in my home state, they'll put out a new gas tax, for example, put that in place. And then by the time it gets passed, the voters have agreed to it. They pull the rug out from under and ends up going for bike paths, buying land and things like that. And it can't go for lane capacity expansion for infrastructure. They can barely keep the focus on fixing infrastructure we have, or certainly adding to it, like what real people want. So instead we get high-speed rail, which is half of it's underwater in the Central Valley right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chair now.
Mr. LaMalfa, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz, and also Chairman Western, and for allowing us to have this field hearing for our Natural Resources Committee. Thanks for our panelists. Thanks for all the audience showing up here today and being heard. Let me go to Mr. Phillips here. You mentioned that there's a variety of projects in California that could be built, and for example, we have many that are on the books that have been engineered or at least studied in the past. And the Auburn Dam, I think, has even been come back into being mentioned, which is a significant amount of storage. So what can be done to get the higher ups in BOR, since you representing BOR, in the conversation along with Bryant? What can we get these folks upstairs to start agreeing with us on the need for water storage instead of the slow slog we're seeing with Sites Reservoir and every other project? Talking with the Dykstra family, Lake Success, in order to get 10 more feet added to it, 28,000 acre feet, 20 plus years of jabbering about that.
Congress is going to have to just direct which projects are to be built and get them going, because agency staff have figured out the formula to keep any project from ever getting built, because the time to get the environmental permitting done is longer than any election cycle, so it's just a never-ending loop. So Congress just needs to say, these are the projects you will build, and here's the funding for it.
Do you notice there's a change in attitude depending on which political party is in power in the White House or maybe in the governor's office?
I've been through a lot of different administrations. There is a change of attitude, and I've also noticed that a lot of the agency staff are the same.
They stay the same. Yeah, they outlast us. That's the counter argument for term limits, because the bureaucracy stays in place and we're here and gone. So I know it looks self-serving for an elected to say no term limits, but it's indeed very frustrating for us on this end. I'm a farmer in my real life too. And Mr. Fukuda, how much have we spent on high-cost rail here in California, you think?
You couldn't. Wow, what a first committee testimony. I don't know, but I'm going to say too much. I lost track in the billions, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's underwater, right where we told them not to put it.
Literally.
They asked a bunch of farmers, where should you put it? Don't put it in the subsidence bowl. Where'd they put it? In the subsidence bowl. At the end of the day, wake up and ask a farmer what you should do in the morning. You're going to get a straight answer. They didn't listen, and now they're dealing with the ramifications.
Yeah, I've taken a wild guess. It's hard to keep track, but I think they've maybe spent around $20 billion for a project originally told to be $33 billion, and there's probably estimates are conservative at $120 billion. We hear in our committee from some of our opponents that, oh, this water storage is so expensive. And when you add the costs of the floods, just we saw at the Dykstra Dairy here, and the neighbors there, what they're going to get in crop losses and orchards being wiped out, the other damage you get from floods to communities and just everything else, the flood value itself. And the water has value, of course. Hydroelectric power. Me and Mr. Bentz share that Oregon border there where they want to tear out 4 perfectly good hydroelectric dams. We want CO2-free power coming from either nuclear power plants or hydro, I guess, if we want to get rid of CO2. I remind you, CO2 is only, take this home, 0.04% of our atmosphere. It's not the end of our world we have in CO2, okay? So water storage means good things. I'm representing Lake Shasta and Lake Orville up there and sites. We have an opportunity with raising Shasta, as was mentioned, 630,000 acre feet by just an 18-foot raise on an existing project. Sites Reservoir, which would be an easy project to build, right in Jeff Sutton's office is like 10 feet from it practically. would be an easy build. 1.5 million acre feet when full. That's 2.1 million acre feet for all Californians. Whether it's environmental water or farm water, and it'll all make hydroelectric power if allowed to. So it's all pluses. And it even gives us a luxury on Lake Shasta of they don't let the water out for agriculture in the spring anymore because they want to keep as much. They want to keep the lake fuller, higher elevation, so the water at the bottom stays colder, so they can release that water off the bottom later in the fall, so the river will be 1 degree colder in temperature, thinking that's going to make all the difference in the amount of fish that might come up the Sacramento River. I tell you, since 1992, it's hundreds of thousands of new acre feet have been flushed out through the Delta. We now have less smelt, we have less salmon, and it's futile. So I got a bill for you on that. The House passed it, H.R. 1, to streamline a lot of this nonsense and getting projects done, as well as forestry, as was mentioned. Forestry is very important for the water actually getting down the hill when we have the right amount of trees per acre. Mr. Westerman's going to hit that one out of the park probably in a minute, as well as these great bills we have here. Calvert's bill, the Fish Act. Why can't we have one-stop shopping for permits? It's just a constant spanking line of having to go through all these different lettered agencies to try and get anything done, because they know, as was said, it's a ball game of trying to stop it. So anyway, I need to stop there, but I look forward to working with you folks. God bless you for hanging in there. Please don't give up on us. We got good ideas. We're going to push them through. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During a House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic hearing yesterday, former Director of National Intelligence Ratcliffe testified that a lab leak is the only explanation credibly supported by our intelligence, by science, and by common sense. Monday morning, a new Senate report concluded there were 2 leaks from the Wuhan lab in 2019, and this nation had funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. At the same Tuesday hearing, former Deputy Secretary of State David Feith revealed that the State Department tried hiding evidence of U.S.-funded gain of research, arguing it could open a Pandora's box. In other words, they concluded it would be easier to lie, therefore endanger the American people and the world, because telling the truth would expose a lot of difficult questions. These revelations are further proof of what many Americans already know to be true. Dr. Anthony Fauci misled the public continuously during the pandemic about the origins of this virus and the risk of gain-of-function research. People in our own government aided this for various reasons, selfishly wanting to defraud and endanger the public while they pursued their own goals. Director Ratcliffe's and Mr. Feith's testimony, as well as the Senate, should disturb every lawmaker in this chamber.
For 5 minutes, Mr. Lamborn. Excuse me, Mr. LaMalfa.
I'm the other Doug.
Yeah.
Doug. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. And welcome, Madam Secretary. Good to see you again. Good to always have a chance to work and speak with you. A lot of conversation beginning about so-called clean energy and such, and I just wanted to ask right out of the chute, what is the basis for CO2 levels that the department is working off of? What % of our atmosphere is CO2 at this point that so many decisions are being based upon?
Congressman, thank you so much for the question. And of course, so much of the work we do is based on science. I am more than happy to have the U.S. Geological Survey or another such bureau get with you on those specific levels.
On the current CO2 level of our atmosphere?
I don't have that current CO2 level with me, but we are happy to follow up on that specific question with your staff as soon as.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Let me shift gears to the Klamath Basin. Of course, something we've had quite a bit of conversation about, and the water usage up there. The Klamath Project was created over 100 years ago for agriculture in that basin and such, and it's been a lot of dispute, especially in recent years, over what the allocation is going to be between that and flushing down the stream for fish, or what's kept in the lake for suckerfish. Now, a lot of the data for what the lake level should be was based in a period between 1904 and 1912, when it was the wettest period in recorded history on the level of the basin.
So it would seem that current flow rates that are being demanded are way above what the pre-dam lake was delivering to the river. Would it be fair to think that that outlier data should be reconsidered, since that was a window of, again, the wettest period on record recorded for the lake, and many, many years have shown other trends? Wouldn't it be fair to reconsider that outlier data?
Congressman, thank you so much for the question. And I know you've had many, many conversations with our Commissioner, Camille Touton, who does a really wonderful job at the Bureau of Reclamation. And that staff who has worked on the Klamath Basin, living, eating, breathing this issue, I know that they have a system that they work off of. And of course, we're always happy to make sure that that we can meet with you and convey that information to you.
And I do appreciate that.
But the department is committed to supporting the Klamath Basin communities amid a fourth consecutive year of drought. I know there's been a lot of moisture in California. That doesn't mean that the drought is over. The extreme hydrologic conditions over the last several years has made operations of the Klamath Project extremely challenging. We're working through those every time.
Please, as time narrows down here, what we're talking about statistically is a short period of time over 100 years ago on really high lake levels, high inflow levels that don't seem to run on the average here. Let me take that to another portion of my question then, is that the Bureau insists that the historic lake level is 4140, or 2.6 feet higher than what the USGS has accepted as the number is 4137.8. So the higher elevations are critical in determining what the water rights are and what's going to be sent downstream. So again, we have a dispute as to what the lake level was and the data that it's being based upon. So would you commit to commissioning a new study by a non-political body to address these current discrepancies we have with BOR and USGS?
I am more than happy to take your concerns, and we know how concerned you are about this issue, back to the Bureau of Reclamation, and we, of course, will be happy to be, whatever the committee asks of us, we'll work to respond in a timely manner.
Well, all right, I appreciate that, and that there was improved water allocation in a really great water year on the lake, but it's still about 50% of what growers should get. And then over on the Trinity Lake side, I want to touch on that as well, is that it was deemed a wet year, yet the lake is only at 37%, while surrounding lakes are about to come to 100%, and they've more than doubled the amount of water flowing out of that lake down the river. And it's even starting to flood some people's homes. So I'd like to forward that information, or it's threatening to do so. If it goes much higher, it's right at the base of people's homes there, and in that Trinity River so-called restoration project, there's so much water flowing out of that lake, it's going to ruin their needs for this summer, et cetera. So I'll want to bring more attention to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for I'll just tell you back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the Northern Marianas for 5 minutes, Mr. Sublime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than a year after it happened, Americans still not have heard the truth about President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. It seems this administration would rather pretend the whole affair never happened. The disastrous, ill-executed withdrawal cost the lives of 13 American servicemen. Despite this horrific failure, not one person in the State Department, military, or any federal agency that planned and executed the withdrawal from Afghanistan has resigned, as they are in disgrace. No one has apologized. No one has owned up to their mistake. Now, the State Department is ignoring a congressional subpoena from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. American people sacrificed blood and treasure in Afghanistan for almost 2 decades. They deserve the truth about what happened. But trying to hide requested information by the State Department is preventing the accountability that we should demand. We have to get to the bottom of how the withdrawal from Afghanistan went off the rails so our nation does not repeat such things in the future. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to ask for unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute and revise and update my remarks.
California seek recognition.
Seeking to ask consent to rest the House 1 minute and revise the remarks, Madam Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, today the Durham report finally came out. And as suspected, the FBI and the DOJ acted vastly improperly with raw, uncorroborated so-called evidence that they used to hound President Trump for well over 2 years and try to influence the 2016 election, as well as make the administration untenable following that. So who's going to go to jail for this? Hard to tell. It's pretty difficult to prosecute these sorts of things when the insiders at DOJ and FBI are going to be trying to make sure it doesn't happen. So what do we do to put at least the confidence of the American people back into the upper echelons of the Department of Justice and the FBI so that we don't have to think that they're going to be doing this sort of thing to anybody they disagree with politically on top of what we just saw? Indeed. How do we regain trust? Because it's been blown up in the name of influencing an election in 2016 and harming the Trump administration. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panelists for being with us here today. I appreciate the opportunity. Commissioner Tootin, you'd mentioned in your comments there three lumps of dollars there for, I think, for storage refurbishment. It adds up to about $1.5 billion. Is that going to be able to be carried out timely so that we don't lose opportunities for storage or lose the facilities themselves?
Good morning, Congressman. Thank you for that question. We are absolutely motivated to be able to put that money into action and on the ground. We've invested $515 million in storage projects in California alone, and it's our intention to move those as expeditiously as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to shift gears to also the Upper Klamath Lake. You knew that was coming.
I did.
In April this year, it was announced that BR would be allocating about 215,000 acre-feet of water for use of farms and ranches there, which we're grateful for. It's better than what's been going on recently, and as well as helping out with the refuges. However, in the big picture here of the water, amazing water availability, the snowpack we've had this year and the rain, all around the state, it was indeed a disappointment because it is half of their historical need and use. So I saw a recent update, I think Friday, that next year either 45 or 50,000, I'm hearing different numbers, but it's going to bring up to either 260 or 265.
65.
And do you know which figure that is?
At 265, Congressman.
265, okay. Again, thank you for the update on that. I'm still wondering though, is this, I think you could have justified an even higher number with the positive condition the lake is this year. So why couldn't it have been even a higher number, such as 285, that growers are looking at up there to have a more normal crop year?
I can't think of any basin better represented on this subcommittee than the Klamath Basin, and fully recognize that the challenges are real there. One of the things we're watching is how the snow melts. While it's there as snow, in past years, we've seen the snow not materialize into runoff. And so when we were looking at our allocations, we wanted to be sure that that 265 would hold while meeting all the other requirements that we need to meet for the system.
Do you anticipate a further augmentation? Should it be more positive farther into the crop year? Such as last year, we made the appeal that there was extra water above the interim operating plan end of season number, and we couldn't, get any movement on the end of year. An extra irrigation would have helped a lot of growers up there when they had potatoes the size of your finger out there. We were looking about for 30,000 acre feet. So do you see that there could be an additional upgrade, say in June or what have you?
We'll adaptively manage the system, and I'm happy to follow up with you and keep you posted as we see the hydrology progress.
So can farmers and ranchers figure out how to plan for that in their crop year?
which is why we wanted to be able to get the numbers out, just not in the allocations, but also for the environmental water account, to make sure that we're providing certainty as they're making business decisions and that the ecosystem is also protected.
Okay. Quickly on the lake elevation of 4139.2 seems to be a target number right now. I wonder what the significance of that number is, because it's moved around from biological opinion to interim operating plan. Is the suckerfish going to be in jeopardy at a number different than 4139.2, like 0.19 or 39.0, 4138, when even the irrigator's water right is all the way down to 4136?
So
I mean, what's the significance of that particular number?
As we're looking at managing the system, we're looking at the requirements, as you mentioned, Congressman, of the species. But as we looked to manage the system earlier this year, a commitment was to keep the lake as high as possible, not only for the species, but to ensure that we're going into the next water year.
Okay, all right. Because we know that this sucker actually thrives in lower water better than other types of fish. Let me point out real quick, I have on this chart here, in order for the long-term flows of the river to be strategized, they were using figures from the called the Hardy Flow Study, using the highest possible numbers from 1904 to 1912 down here, from one of the wettest periods in the 123-year history, when you do have a lot of other low flow years. So the target ends up being based on the super high flow numbers from 100 years ago, as opposed to something a little more the average. So they can hardly meet the goals because the number's been set so high, the bar set so high. So is this something that can be revisited here? Because indeed, a lot of us believe that this is an artificially high target to be met from something that happened. You know, you look at the whole chart here. You got these heavy zones here. None of them have been that heavy in the 100 years since.
So we are committed, and I've been out to the Klamath Basin 3 times since I've been in this position. We'll be there this summer on talking about what a holistic solution is for the basin. As it's been mentioned before, it's not sustainable, and we want to be able to provide certainty to the water users, but also protect the ecosystem. So
Okay, well, we have impossible numbers for the water users to meet out of their allocation, so I might need to yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Ms.
Doug LaMalfa. It's unusually quiet for you.
Thank you for yielding me time there to my friend and colleague from New Jersey. Appreciate it. You know, talking on the issue of campaign being used for buying votes, the president, back in his 2020 campaign, he promised to cancel up to $10,000 of federal student loan debt per borrower. And of course, after his election, he called for the 117th Congress to pass a bill to facilitate $10,000 in student loan forgiveness. So when he first announced his attempt by his administration to forgive the debt for those who need it most was in August of 2022. So since that announcement, the plan has been mired in pushback from the judiciary and legislative branches of the government. So it isn't even seen as legal or constitutional, is the charge. The main legal argument for its ability to forgive student loans is that the 2003 HEROES Act, a bill that provides reservists and their families relief from making student loan payments, also allows theoretically the executive branch to cancel student debt for anyone they wish to. This theory has, of course, faced severe pushback from many legal experts. The administration's argument is that because of the language of HEROES Act from 2003, the president would somehow have the authority to unilaterally transfer up to $500 billion in student loan debt from those who are contractually required to repay it to taxpayers who never borrowed the money. Not the taxpayers, but some of the students. The plan would cancel up to $20,000 in federal student loan debt for more than 40 million borrowers. Republicans and Democrats have voted for legislation that prevents the administration's bailout from taking effect. Many Republicans see the bailout as a wealth distribution scam because it is in fact forces working class Americans to subsidize the college tuition of wealthier Americans. Nearly all borrowers who to date obtain federal student loans do so under the William D. Ford Direct Loan Program authorized by Congress in 1993. The designation of this credit program as a direct loan program means that when making an FDLP loan, the federal government disburses funds to a non-federal borrower under a contract with the borrower that requires repayment. Since September of last year, multiple lawsuits have resulted in the administration's scheme being put on hold. A federal judge in Texas declared the entire plan to be unlawful. The Department of Education stopped taking applications from student loan borrowers who would have been forgiven under the plan, but the DOJ is currently appealing that decision. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected an appeal from the Biden administration asking to allow the scheme to continue while the Supreme Court took up the case. Lawsuits against the Biden administration have also been filed in the U.S. 8th Court of Appeals. In a case known as Biden versus Nebraska, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to weigh in on the constitutionality of the plan. Oral arguments were heard in February. A decision has not been announced, but many legal experts expect the court to overturn the program. Congress has itself reacted negatively to the plan. H.J. Res. 45, a bipartisan resolution which uses the Congressional Review Act to overturn the administration's student loan forgiveness plan, was vetoed by the president earlier in June. Republicans in Congress have likened the president's plan to a vote-buying scheme claiming it is an attempt to buy college graduate votes in exchange for the possibility of financial reward in the form of debt forgiveness. Concerns have been raised that the president's scheme is successful. There's a possibility a future president may forgive large sections of the country's debts and use the Biden student loan cancellation as a precedent to justify it. Bottom line is that for the people that took the loans out, they need to pay their own loans back. Hardworking people in this country that chose not to take student loans for college or just went immediately to work, went into a trade, other aspects of that, should not be footing the bill for those that agreed to do it when they signed up as adults to take these loans. Needless, we don't need to have an administration trying to somehow intervene and buy votes on that and promise things it cannot deliver for folks that really don't deserve it when they incurred the debt as making a free decision to do so. So this is a scam, a scheme, and it needs to be prevented. I hope the Supreme Court rules that way, and Congress needs to act to make sure that isn't carried out. So let's reward the people that work hard and pay their debts and not have a giveaway program that the federal government does in order to buy votes. I thank you for the time to my colleague. I yield back to him.
Thank you. And
thank you, Madam Speaker. So I was looking at a local news source here today. The title of the article was "Heat Waves Add Burden to Electric Vehicle Owners." So there is challenges, it turns out, that these heavy, expensive batteries in electric vehicles have a tendency to get damaged by high temperatures. Electric vehicles are extremely complicated and they're expensive. Repairing batteries in them is nearly impossible, and replacing one is very costly. I saw a bit on there's a very expensive brand of pickup out that they were talking about how to repair it in a fender bender. That somebody hit the rear quarter panel on it, and it kind of drove the body work up into the rest of the forward of the car, the forward part of the car. Well, it isn't just a matter of repairing that quarter panel. They had to take the vehicle almost entirely apart and made it a $42,000 repair because there's so much complexity with all the electric vehicle technology that drives all the different wheels and has such an extensive wiring system. So we're being told as Americans that we should start driving these vehicles. We should buy them, replace what we have, and drive these vehicles. And we have my home state of California basically forcing the mandate on that, followed closely behind Biden administration, wanting to do certain things they make up a year, okay, X amount by 2030, let's say 50% by 2030 and 75% by 2035 and Same thing at the federal level, X amount by 2040 and 2050. They just make this stuff up with fancy round numbers. So some of the recommendations in the article about how to deal with your electric vehicles are actually the absurd part of it, is that when for the EV drivers, they should don't park your car in the sun, okay? Charge during cooler times of day. Now, I got to spend the weekend here in D.C. because my plane was canceled going home the other day. So you try and figure out where the cool time of day is in D.C. And when you're going to charge your car. Use air conditioning sparingly. Sure. In places like this, or even where there's more humidity in the south and others, you're going to drive along in this car because it's electric and not use your air conditioner. One of the really good ones was that they wanted you to not charge. They wanted you to keep the charger plugged in while you're using the air conditioner. Okay, what does that even mean in the article? Keep your vehicle charging plugged in while you're using the battery charger. Does that mean, people made fun of this when they first came along, that you would have an extension cord that's 10 miles long so you can keep it charging while you're driving around? I mean, it becomes really absurd after a while. So what is the bottom line here? For certain people, electric vehicles make sense for them. If they have short commutes, if they do a lot of in-town driving, and it'll last for a particular amount of time. The article goes on to state, though, that most of the time you can come home and plug in, and then you don't need to use a fast charger unless you're on a long trip. If you're on an extended trip, then you're going to have to find a means to do that. You can't just go 200 miles and then charge it for 8 hours, but they don't want you to use a fast charger because it's tough on the battery in hot conditions. So your mobility is really what's being affected, what's being taken away here. And there's those in this place, in the regulatory scheme we have in my home state of California or here in D.C., that don't really care that you have mobility. They don't want you to have that mobility. They want you to be tied to what they believe are your walkable neighborhoods and stay in your 15-minute cities. They don't seem to like that. So this all starts with these mandates. Taking away the systems, the things that you use normally, use well, use at your choice, and forcing you into something else. So it's whether it's your vehicles, whether it's your gas stove, or your other appliances, your yard maintenance tools, they want to take that out and convert you to a grid that is not actually ready to accept the mass amount of charging that is going to be needed to do this again. California's grid on any hot day is close to going down. They have to start telling people to shut off their manufacturing plants and such so they can keep the grid going. They're tearing down hydroelectric dams in my district right now because they aren't green enough, even though it makes CO2-free power. It's absurd what's going on with the regulatory state, and we need to stop the Biden administration by doing it just by executive action. It needs to run through us so we're held accountable to you. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman
from California seek recognition. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to express my grave concern regarding the alleged involvement of members of the Biden family in criminal activities. The evidence keeps popping up again and again and again that there's a lot of problems with their interactions with foreign concerns. Our duty as representatives is to demand the transparency and accountability from our leaders, whether it's within this House or in the administration, in the bureaucracy, or what have you. That said, Congress, American people cannot ignore the mounting evidence and questionable business dealings that have plagued Hunter Biden and the rest of the Biden family for seemingly years now. We know Hunter Biden served as a board member for a firm that's been accused of bribery. We know that of his work with an investment fund that is controlled by the Bank of China, getting paid huge salaries for something he has no expertise and really spending no time on. All this comes with other pressing allegations of questionable business ethics, legal exposure, and concerns about U.S. national security because of Hunter Biden's relationships in China. Yet what do we hear lately? They want to go after President Trump
Gentleman's
again for
time
J6
is expired.
stuff. What's
Gentleman's
the deal?
time is
I yield
expired.
back.
For what?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the cornerstones of our responsibilities in Congress is oversight of government operations, whether that's the agencies, the White House, the courts, or of ourselves. So what are we looking at right now in the Biden administration? They can't even keep the White House clean and orderly and honorable. The story coming out on this cocaine issue is embarrassing for the country. It's embarrassing that the leader of the free world will not investigate and provide answers on that and some other tawdry activities that have gone on the lawn there during other events. Accountability is extremely important for people to have faith in what their government is doing. And to see the Department of Justice either not doing its job or being weaponized against individuals they disagree with politically really lowers the faith that people and us as legislators have in the process here. We got to do better. And that starts with our ability to have oversight hearings that are attended and questions are answered here in this House, but also maybe a little better self-governance by the White House and this place of acting right, of doing right, and being honorable in their jobs. I yield back.
For what purposes, the gentleman from New York seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to rest the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the distinguished gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it ought to be obvious. American schools are for American students. This should not be a controversial statement, yet in the last few months, cities such as New York and Chicago, for example, across the U.S. have started to use schools as shelters for illegal immigrants. All of this is a result of the Biden administration's failed border policies that have turned every state into a border state, regardless if they're actually near the border. The policies have only further encouraged more illegal immigration because of the promise of illegal immigrants being allowed to remain in our country with proper process and cushy food and housing. The tab for all this, of course, is being picked up by the American taxpayer. The recent expansion of these programs into schools is an insult to the reason public schools even exist, to provide a free education that teaches the kids necessary skills for them to be successful in life, all of which stand to be disrupted by illegal immigrants being housed in their school gyms, classrooms, and taking up the resources that rightfully belong to the American students. This is why we need the Schools Not Shelters Act by Mr. Molinaro from New York. We can't guarantee who are even coming into these shelters or if the information we have on them is at all accurate. And we certainly can't promise parents that there will be no harm to their kids. A controlled border solves these issues, and the Schools Not Shelters Act is a very important key to starting on that. I yield back.
The gentleman.
Our lives now. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield next to the gentleman from California, Ms. LaMalfa.
Thank you, my colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate you leading this once again as we communicate with American folks the good things we're getting done around here. And that's important. The communication, the openness of the House to the people is a critical element and something we were missing for about 2.5 years around here as the COVID disaster, exacerbated by government action as a disaster, hit this country. Indeed, overreaction has cost us so much economically, so much to the goodwill and the mental state of many of our people. You know, look at the damage that was done to our school kids as they lost basically 2 years out of their lives. And I think that'll be damage that's done to a generation that I don't know how quickly that's going to recover. But we here, Republicans in the majority in the U.S. House, have worked towards restoring people's faith in their government by allowing them to participate. Opening the House, the gallery once again. I could have people from my district here tonight that right wouldn't have been seen just not that many months ago. And so our committee process, open to the people, instead of being done by Zoom or some other effect. Indeed, very important, because there's nothing like being in the room with people, to have your witnesses there and have members be able to look at each other and have a dialogue across the way instead of on the internet where, you know what the distractions are there. So just that, just reopening the House and bringing it back to the people and open to the people. Tours, people are able to see their capital and just be amazed by what the founders had in mind when you feel the history here of what it's about. But importantly, the policy we worked on this year, the Lower Energy Costs Act. Now, I can't even describe how important energy is to our economy, our way of life, for our culture. All of our forms of energy have made us competitive and strong around the world. It helped us win World War II. It has helped us to become the most competitive and strongest economy ever until we see the damage being done currently by the Biden administration, stopping pipelines, stopping traditional forms of energy, driven by oil and gas. Yes, there's always going to be a place for oil and gas. And what we look at energy projections around the world, it's only going to go up in all the other countries except for the ones that are hamstringing themselves with this Paris Accord business. So energy, a cornerstone of a strong economy and our way of life and our culture. Oil and gas is part of that. Nuclear energy is something that needs to be continued to cultivate that, and the new technologies coming with that. It doesn't have to be a scary thing, oh, the nuclear waste, or it's going to have a meltdown. No, nonsense. These are things that can be continued to be improved on if we have the will to do it. Congress needs to move in helping to fund the type of research, and also the permitting process needs to be streamlined so that these projects can move forward. As we know, with windmills and with solar panels, they don't work all the time. You have to wait for the wind to blow, or the sun to come up, or the clouds to go away in order to have those forms of energy. With nuclear power, with hydroelectric, like right now they're trying to tear down dams because of dubious environmental regulations and thoughts in my district. Natural gas, these are cornerstones that you can rely on 24/7 as base load power. So what we're seeing here with this forced conversion to electric vehicles, electric stoves, taking away your gas stove. Look how mad people are going to be at home when they have to cook in a way that doesn't fit how they like or what they're used to or what's efficient. And the latest crazy thing, banning gas generators, is something the Biden administration, it seems like they're just copying the craziest of my home state of California. Now, what's a generator for? It's for making electricity, generating electricity. How do you generate electricity? Well, you don't use other electricity to generate electricity. It has to come from a different source, whether it's going to be hydropower, again, what I listed, or a personal generator. It's going to be either gas or diesel or maybe hooked up to your propane tank. It's absurd what's going on. We need to continue to have an energy policy that helps Americans, helps us thrive, and House Republicans are going to keep fighting for that because it makes sense and it makes us stronger. So I appreciate the time to help remind people this is where things really come from, where our economy comes from, our freedom, and our basic lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. There's so much wisdom.
Okay. I'm sorry, panelists and fellow colleagues. We've had two other simultaneous committees, both that had votes during them, right, Mr. Carl? So anyway, I'm kind of parachuting in, but I was curious of Mr. Gibbons-Fly. Just in general, I caught part of the conversation here about how many days, fishing days you're allowed, and licensing and offshore, international waters and all that. How well do other countries adhere to similar standards of what the U.S. has for its fishermen? Does China even have them? Does other countries even have them like this? Or are we the only ones that have these, sounds like rationing of days, et cetera?
Well, there are a couple of different layers to your question, Congressman, and thank you very much for the question. The first is, there is a series of rules to which all countries are expected to comply, but no one enforces those rules as strictly and with as much rigor and with the level of penalties as the government of the United States applies to the U.S. fleet. So we're facing an unlevel playing field there. And clearly, we would simply like the other countries to enforce the rules in the same way that the United States does. There's a second element to this, that different countries can operate under different rules. The Pacific Island states, for example, exempt themselves as developing states from a number of the requirements, but this creates a loophole for countries like China, like Korea, like Taiwan, who can reflag their vessels, can enter into charter arrangements, and then themselves become exempt from those requirements. So the United States is complying with one set of requirements, and the number of vessels that are exempting themselves by reflagging and chartering is going up and up and up. So the playing field is becoming more and more unlevel. And yet, the convention itself provides that participating territories like American Samoa are to be treated in the same way as the Pacific Island states, and that is not happening with respect to the American Samoa-based fleet.
Thank you. It sounds like it's probably almost impossible to keep everybody level, even if you're allowing extra for particular states to even keep them within the two tiers and you know, with the reflagging and all that. So I guess what you have to do is just go outfish them until the whole thing is over with. So let me jump to another. Thank you for another panelist here, Mr. Bescher. With the issue of cow and calf kills due to predators and such, I sympathize with what you have to deal with on proving it, whether you have a wolf kill or a grizzly, I guess. So the topic here I have is that what's happening with predatory black vultures. Is there a reimbursement plan for that? And what kind of proof is there on that? And comment on any of those, whether it's the vultures or on I want to go back to the wolf and the grizzly if you wish.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Yes, there's a livestock indemnity program, but you have to meet a threshold of 5% loss over your total herd before.
On the vulture or all the predators?
On all predators, sir.
So you have to lose 5% before they talk to you, basically?
Yes.
5%?
Yes, through the Farm Service Agency.
So because my understanding, and I'm kind of loose on it right now, is that each time there's a calf kill or a cow kill or whatever, that you document that, and Fish and Wildlife is supposed to come take a look. And my understanding is there's supposed to be reimbursement for each time it happens if they agree that it's been proven.
In Missouri, how it reads right now is you have to have a licensed vet or a USDA APHIS official come out and do a necropsy and prove that the animal was taken alive.
Yep.
And you turn those in at each take.
How much does it cost to process that, and who's paying for that?
Well, in Missouri right now, the Missouri Department of Agriculture will reimburse you $250, but with the shortage of veterinarians across this country, you're not going to get one without him being on an emergency basis, and we have to pay a $250 emergency fee. Then the necropsy will probably cost you another $250, so you're going to be out $250.
What would be a nice round number for how much income you would make from that head of stock, generally,
In today's time, about $2,200.
So $500 off the top of that, on all the massive margin you have, right?
Yes.
So
yeah, very massive.
And that's that differs from state to state. Sounds like Missouri has different rules than others.
I believe so, sir. Yes.
Yeah, because California, where I'm from, unfortunately, as far as the politics of it, I love my home, but anyway, it's our guys, especially up in Northern California, like Siskiyou County, Eastern Shasta County, like that. They have a devil of time getting them to verify, yes, this is a wolf kill. I mean, what else is it? But say, well, we don't know. So, I mean, any more thoughts on that with?
Well, and verifying that loss is getting tough to do. USDA APHIS, there's stress for personnel to get one of them out. Shortage of veterinarians.
Do you believe we have a shortage of wolves in this country yet?
No, I do not.
Yeah, time to pull it off the endangered species list.
Excuse me, sir?
Time to pull it off the endangered species list and all the hyper-protect. Yeah. All right. God bless you, sir. You hang in there. Hopefully the cavalry's coming here. Take care.
We urge our colleagues to support the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield now to the gentleman from, speaking of California, the gentleman from the northern portions of California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson from Louisiana, and also Mr. Fulcher from Idaho. I just happen to be going to speak with you about that subject on California. Now, California is a beautiful place, beautiful climate and terrain and territory. it's just its politics have gotten so upside down in the last, pick a number of years, 40 years, 50 years, on not really being there to serve the people anymore, but to serve climate agendas and other crazy agendas I won't go into here tonight. You know, I live in the rural part of California. I like to say the normal part still, in the far north, where we farm and we ranch. We still attempt to do mining in order to produce the products that city people need. And if they didn't have us around to do those, then I don't know, they want to, guess, import all of it, which seems to be the direction here. Let's import it all from China. So, you know, one of the interesting things, I won't say funny because, well, the people watching might think it's funny because we do this ourselves, but our California Air Resource Board released a rule requiring all new cars in California that would be sold new to be zero-emission vehicles by 2035. Now, this was tried back in the 80s, where they said, well, we want, I believe maybe it was 1990, 10% of all cars sold by the year 2000, if I remember the numbers correctly, to be zero-emission vehicles. So what did we end up with was that the car companies were trying to make battery-powered vehicles that looked like glorified golf carts, or maybe those little rigs you saw on Fantasy Island that Tattoo was driving around in, to be legitimate vehicles you would have out on the roadway. You saw basically oversized golf carts with license plates on trying to somehow meet this mandate. Well, CARB figured that out at the time that it wasn't going to get there, so they relented on it. But now they're not relenting. So we have this mandate, not actually passed by the legislature or signed by the governor, but made by the California Air Resources Board, which is famous around the country for being heavy-handed on truckers and off-road vehicles and everything else. So here's the funny part. Just a few days after this mandate came out, our esteemed Governor Newsom had to publicly beg electric vehicle owners to not charge their cars due to concerns of the power grid and blackouts. He told them, hey, please don't charge your cars right now because our grid is overstretched during that particular time. So you have also a few months later, when the winter came in, residents in Sierra Nevada lost power for many days due to heavy snowstorms, knocking the power out. So they couldn't heat their homes and do normal things there. But if they had also an electric vehicle, they couldn't even have gotten out of there to go someplace where it was warm or for other needs, you know, maybe emergency medical or what have you. We also have rolling blackouts that are common in the state, either due to overuse and not enough power on the grid to keep things going. So the industries in California, many of them have agreements with the utilities that they'll voluntarily shut down if they're called, if the grid looks like it's going to be overtaxed at a particular point. So you have manufacturers that have to lay off their workers for the rest of the day, stop production in order to pull offline and not use power because we don't have enough of a power grid in California. So, and then up in my area, because we have a forest issue, which our forests aren't managed as well as they should be, especially federal land, the U.S. Forest Service, where the power lines have been run through for many decades, where there's hydro generation, etc. Power may be coming in from another state. We don't get to maintain around the power lines like we used to because it might be an environmental concern. We can't take the trees down that you need to make sure that they can't swing if they're falling. They might fall within the path of those power lines if the tree, you know, is taller than what the clearance is, right? So I had to pass a bill a couple of years ago to make the process just a little bit easier to get a permit from Forest Service to do that on federal land. It's still not easy and it's still not very timely, but it got a little bit better. So we have that to deal with. They call it a public safety power shutoff. Especially affects part of my district. It seems like when I drive through Tehama County, sometimes during that time of year. Now they've improved it a little bit, but the whole county would be shut off because the wind blew and it might cause branches to blow into the power lines, therefore bad things happening, such as the Camp Fire, which 85 people died in Paradise, California, due to a power line problem a few miles east of there blowing through. And then other fires like the Car Fire near Redding, Zog Fire, and many, many others. And then we saw, of course, the effect tragically in Hawaii that we just mourned this week, and that's what this red ribbon represents, because we're not managing the lands around power lines. and this is happening right in California, at the same time that they're mandating more and more electricity use, forcing us into vehicles we can't afford or don't want. Also, they want to ban gas stoves and gas water heaters and make them be on the grid as well. I mean, you couldn't get any dumber with the stuff we're doing in that home state, that beautiful home state I have of California. Rolling blackouts. By miracle, last year they decided, well, we need to keep the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant going for another 5 years instead of maybe a 40-year permit. It was put in about 1982 when I was going to school down there at San Luis Obispo. And it had a much longer life than what they're allowing because, oh, we don't like nukes, you know, nukes are scary, even though they make zero CO2, as does hydropower. Right now, they're in the process of tearing dams out to make hydroelectric power in my district, and they have their eyes on more up in Washington and other areas because, oh, it might be an environmental issue, you know. It's really absurd what we're doing ourselves. We're putting ourselves into the Stone Age so we can go live in caves and eat insects that these guys are prescribing for us, you know. It's just, it's disgusting. And so now they want to apply this towards our vehicles, you know. We've got the cleanest burning, most efficient vehicles ever being put out by the car manufacturers. But no, they don't look at it that way. They don't give credit for how much better and clean our LA Basin's air is cleaner than it has been. You know, you remember the 60s and 50s and all that and such. It's much cleaner now. We made so much progress on this, yet they just want to, because they have the power to or arbitrarily just think it's a feel-good policy, take these vehicles away, take car choice away from people. I remember the EPA under Andy Wheeler just a few years ago was trying to make it where people could have more affordable cars and not having this 54.5 mile per gallon mandate. Now, what does a 54.5 mile per gallon vehicle look like to you? Is that a car choice to you when that mandate was going to be fully fleshed out? I mean, most cars, you know, pretty good gas mileage cars get 30, 35, somewhere around there. A lot of others, you know, 20, 25, depending on what you want. But see, it isn't about your choice. It's about government deciding what you need or what you should have. You know, what is your neighborhood going to look like? How much do you get to travel anymore? All this massive control issues. So we have public safety power shutoffs. We have them tearing down the hydroelectric dams. And then the dams we still do have, they're requiring more and more of the water to go out in such a way that they don't even turn the turbines, but instead, oh, we want the cold water to go out to lower the temperature of the river maybe by 1 degree, and it'll be a little bit better for the fish in the river. Or we want the water to come off the top of the lake that can't go through the turbines, because we want to save that colder water for later in the season so it can be 1 degree colder downriver for the fish. I mean, it's crazy. So when this first was announced by CARB, the governor of California, we sent him a letter, and to his CARB chair, Leanne Randolph, asking him to consider alternate policies to reduce emissions that do not add additional strain to the state's energy grid or restrictions on consumer choice. You know, choice. We all like that around here, don't we? So I thank my California Republican colleagues for joining me on sending a unified message, and believe that this letter has helped us get a bill on the floor this week, which is known as H.R. 1435. Which the bill would prevent the U.S. EPA from issuing a waiver to California Air Resources Board in order to enact that rule the state is trying to do, without, again, legislation by the elected legislators. So, and this is what they've been using for a lot of years to put California even under a tighter scrutiny than a lot of the rest of the country, and it makes us uncompetitive in many aspects. So though 95% of vehicles on America's roads are run on internal combustion engines, they're using the acronym ICE these days, states like California are trying to pass these egregiously unrealistic emissions mandates to force American car manufacturers and others, foreign ones too, to prioritize EV manufacturing. Where are we going to mine the materials to make these? Where are we going to have the power on the grid to run them? You're going to have to change the power grid in neighborhoods to have the massive amount of transformers and the wires and the poles and the insulators and all that in order to have these charging units inside people's homes in their garages. They aren't taking that into account. It's just this la-di-da, pie-in-the-sky deal. We'll just mandate it and it'll be great by 2035. And the idea that people just can't afford these vehicles, as many of them are sometimes $17,000 to $20,000 more for the equivalent same size, same usage type vehicle. They don't care. So a whole bunch of the country's economy would be affected by this because probably a bunch of other states would follow California's ideas on this with this waiver that they're seeking. So it's a real market manipulation that nobody has asked for other than the do-gooders in Congress, at the state level, and others that are forcing us in many ways in our lives. They want to force us what kind of home we live in, what we eat, what we drive, and how we power our stoves and our water heaters. Now, I mentioned a little bit ago how the grid got knocked out in some of the mountainous areas after the storm there. So you think, well, at least people can go turn on their generator in order to provide some electricity and some heat in their home, perhaps. No. They want to ban gas-powered or fuel-powered generators too, okay? So I'm wondering, what are you supposed to run a generator on if you can't run it on gas or diesel or natural gas or a propane tank or something you might have nearby? What are you supposed to run it on when the power goes out? If you live in a rural area where it frequently public safety power shutoffs or fire or other things happen that knock out the grid, what are you supposed to do? They just make up the mandates, man. You know, Governor Newsom, who is maybe aspiring to be president, I warn you people across the country who are watching, don't fall for this stuff. You know, I like to joke around a little bit. I'm from California. People, don't do what we do, okay? It's going to affect your privacy. It's going to affect your freedom. It'll affect basic choices, affect your economy of your household and of your state. So we don't even nearly have the EV charging systems that it would take to have them close enough and enough of them on site. You ought to see the lines there we have. Like there's one place down in San Luis Obispo, you can see the cars just all lined up. All the Teslas and all these other folks lined up, waiting for the opportunity to plug onto one of these things for 2 hours and go about their way, about their business as they travel. You probably heard about the story. I think the guy was from Michigan. He bought, I believe, the new Ford electric truck and was going to go camping with it. Well, he made it about 1 or 2 states away and finally had to give up on it. And I think he went and bought a Dodge Cummins diesel in order to complete his family camping trip because it was way oversold as what it could do versus what it actually do. So getting back to the bill, we don't want to empower California and perhaps up to 17 other states with this EPA waiver that they can force this stuff upon the people and take away their choices, their mobility, you know, to do what they need to do. Ask a guy who's a contractor, a roofing company, or a farmer, a rancher, a miner, a logger. Do they need their F-250 or do they want to get a fleet of 5 Priuses to go do the same job? You know, they need to have choices and these mandates. This is at a time when we got, as I said, the cleanest running, most efficient vehicles we've ever made. And, oh, we got to cut down the CO2, climate change. Climate change, give me a break. CO2 is only 0.04% of our atmosphere. They act like it's the end of the world. CO2 is an important building block for plant life. Everything's made out of carbon. And they act like, because they've been able to dream this up as a killer, that we have to stop all things that make CO2. Well, I'll tell you what, if we're too good at this, if we go below 0.02%, plant life starts dying off. Now, we'll never be that good at getting rid of CO2, but we're going to spend trillions doing it, and we're going to make ourselves a third world country here while China and others keep going ahead. Even though I believe our Governor Newsom's running over to China for a visit to talk about climate change. Meanwhile, we have one of the worst homeless problems in the state of California, and our economy isn't that great either. And our water situation isn't that great either, as even though we were blessed with so much rain this year, we need to build water storage for people. We need to build that for our agriculture so we can supply this nation with the food it needs from California. With so many of our crops, 90+% come from California. You wouldn't have your almonds, you wouldn't have your tomatoes, you wouldn't have your pistachios, you wouldn't have many things that come from California, but we're prioritizing this nonsense of taking away people's vehicles and climate change that it gets preached on half the time around here, and every policy in this place has to be run through a climate change filter, even though it's nonsense that CO2, once again, is only 0.04% of our atmosphere, and it's not a killer because carbon is a building block of everything we live off of. So please call your Congress member and tell them to support H.R. 1435 and don't empower California to control your state and your economy by mandating what kind of vehicles, not only because it's going to affect, it will ripple out from our whacked out state to your state, okay? And what vehicles you're going to drive and how you're going to do business in your business. So please check that out and support the bill. Thank you for the time, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. And sadly, what happens in California, that giant market out there, affects the entire country. So I appreciate you shining.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, I hear a lot of complaining about what it's going to do to California. Well, don't cry for California. We do a lot of bad ideas that affect the whole country. Indeed, we have 1/8 of the country's population and a little over 1/8 of the country's auto sales. So what does that mean? Well, we're not going to get a whole lot of help from the manufacturers or the CEOs because they want to get along with Washington, D.C., but we're here about preserving choice for all Americans on automobiles. The California Air Resources Board is an unelected board appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom, who is not the guy that's on your side for freedom. As well, recently, after this mandate in California came out by 2035, a few days later he said, oh, people, would you please not charge your electric vehicles right now because it's going to affect our grid because we don't have enough power on the grid, rolling blackouts, bans on hydroelectric dams. They almost took down our last nuclear power plant. So California is not the place a lot of solutions are going to come from. Indeed, you said Republicans put these in place. Well, these have been weaponized in the 50 years since then with Air Board and all the other entities that have been put in place. So 1435 will preserve choices for people. I've actually lived it myself as I've had a real job on a
Gentleman's
farm.
time has expired.
So in closing, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the motion to recommit and yes on H.R. 1435. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Washington.
Now, the gentleman from California, Representative LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary. Welcome to our committee lair. Glad to have you here today. So we've covered a lot of interesting topics so far. High-speed rail in California, that's always a fun one for me since I've watched that evolve for a long time as a Californian, and still the fact remains that the price of the thing has quadrupled from what the taxpayers originally sold when they approved about $10 billion worth of bonds, and the ARA Act in about 2009 supplemented with about $3.5 billion more when all the other states threw theirs back in the pot and California got it all. We've only been able to supplement that with some CO2 auctions at the state level. So we're going to be probably 70, 80, 90 billion dollars short to complete that project. So however much begging they come with hat in hand to this Congress here, to DC, that's what they're going to be ultimately asking for because it'll never pay for itself. So it's time to move on to something else. I was found it interesting here earlier on the price of electric vehicles that an F-150 is $50,000 now because it's about $10,000 higher it should be because of supply chain and a COVID shutdown that was much longer than it should have been. So you can see an F-150 at 50 grand, but you can see the Lightning version up to all electric is about 70 to 80 grand. You can look that right up. So EV vehicles are going to be much costlier than the same equivalent, same size of a internal combustion vehicle. So that's a reality that consumers are going to face as they get pushed out of having the choices. Is what Mr. Perry was saying. Ford is losing their rear end on these things right now, and that's going to have to affect the price of everything else as well as the jobs. So the thing that it comes down to is that we're going to have to make them here, we're going to let China make them. Well, even China making them is something that people aren't asking for unless they have a free choice. So what I want to get at, Mr. Secretary, first, why are we doing all this? Is it high-speed rail? Is it because we're chasing a few tons of CO2? All these electric vehicles, is it because we're chasing CO2? Is that really the whole deal?
Here's the way I look at it. The EV revolution is happening with or without us. Exercising their free choice, Americans have tripled the proportion of cars that they are purchasing electric already, and we're still at the very outset of this revolution. You add to the fact that the cost of producing the cars will come down, and that if you've ever driven one, you probably know that it has superior performance, lower maintenance costs, lower costs of fueling it.
Not in my rural
and
district,
fewer moving
because
parts.
I have to drive many, many miles, and I can't. People don't want to come to my district so much because they can't count on being able to charge their vehicle if they want to go way up to Modoc County or something. So
yeah, for sure. If you're driving more than a couple hundred miles a day, then you really depend on that charging infrastructure, some of which isn't there. On the other hand, the vast majority of Americans will do what Chasten and I do, which is we got a hybrid plug-in minivan. We just charge it in the garage, and it does what we need for most purposes. But anyway, the point is to get to that very important question you asked: why, if EVs are coming anyway, why have a policy intervention?
No,
Why
being
spend
forced.
taxpayer money?
They're
The answer
being
is
forced.
this.
They're being forced by
No,
government.
nobody's being forced.
CEOs of these corporations don't have a spine. They're all falling in line.
I don't know if you sat down with these CEOs, but I would say they're pretty tough and smart
No, they're
business
scared of Washington, D.C. You know, years ago when the mandate was to have 54.5 mile per gallon average, oh, we can do that by the year 22 or whatever. No way in hell they can hit that before all this electric stuff started happening. It was 25, I think. You know what a 54.5 mile per gallon internal combustion vehicle looks like? It's about this big. Okay, so
Yeah,
nobody wants those. Nobody wants these electric vehicles unless you're an elite that can afford them. People in my district sure as hell don't want them. So keep going. Why are we doing this? Is it over CO2?
Yeah, we're doing it for 3 reasons. Even though the EV revolution is going to happen anyway.
Oh, it's a revolution caused
I would
by
love to be able to answer your question, Congressman.
Yeah, okay.
Even though we think that transition is happening in the automotive sector no matter what, there are 3 things that we think are not guaranteed. Will it happen quickly enough to materially help with climate change? Will it happen on equitable terms that are available to people who aren't wealthy and
Okay,
might
I'm
not be
running
able?
short on
and
time,
3
so
if I could just please finish my answer.
Let's drill
If I
on
could
the climate
just
change.
finish
Let's-
the
others
third.
will
Will it be
drill
made
the
on
climate-
American
It's
soil
about
or not?
CO2, isn't it?
How's
what
that?
Percent of the atmosphere is CO2 that we're chasing here?
I'm sorry?
What percent of the atmosphere is CO2 that we're chasing here? Because you talked about climate change.
I don't know the percentage of atmospheric gases.
You don't know the
that consist
percent of the
CO2.
atmosphere.
What I can tell you is that climate change is real. We got to do something about it.
Yeah, this one's
And
called
we've been-
autumn, sir. So
I'm sorry?
This one's called autumn right now, so yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't make out what you said, sir.
This climate change right now is called autumn, yes.
Yeah, that's the seasons changing,
Mm-hmm.
which respectively is not the same thing as the climate changing. And as somebody who is hoping to retire in the 2050s and who has kids who will be old enough to ask me as they're getting to their 30s, whether we did enough to deal with climate change or whether we just did what was convenient, I take that really seriously.
Reclaiming my time, thank you, Mrs. Secretary. The trillions and trillions we're going to cost our kids to chase a tiny percentage of CO2 will bankrupt all of us, and bankrupt our economy, and ship it to China for all the other reasons. So I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to rest the House 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So during the month of August, we had several wildfires break out in my district up in Siskiyou County at the top of California. So as you know, our federal wildland firefighters are on the front lines battling the blazes and preventing them from spreading to populated areas and burning down all of our forests and the habitats that's in them. So they're doing their jobs, working 16-hour days often, grueling heat, remote, rugged terrain. And so what happens? The new food vendor for the Forest Service tried serving them beans and rice on bread on the far side there, and then moldy cheese sandwiches for our firefighters that we asked to be out there in risky conditions, in tough, hot conditions as well. What an insult. What a slap on the face, as they have a national food vendor trying to provide meals like that actually would cause harm to their health as well as just the sustenance they need to work hard. So in line of all this, we also find that the Klamath National Forest supervisor who fired this food service vendor was later investigated by the Forest Service higher-ups, and they only backed off because the scandal was made public. Now, since then, it has been corrected thanks to that Klamath Forest supervisor, and these unacceptable conditions are not going to continue. American people expect accountability for our firefighters, for our workers. I yield back.
For what purposes?
Ladies, time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What committee are we in, Mr. Chairman?
The House Natural Resources Committee,
Okay,
Mr. LaMalfa.
and does it have jurisdiction over the national park system?
Has jurisdiction over all of the Department of Interior and national parks.
So today's hearing about the national parks, in this case in New York, is an appropriate venue for the conversation, yes?
We have a duty to have oversight over the National Park Service.
Okay, and there's 435 members of the House with many, many committees meeting, some of them working on fiscal issues such as funding the government today?
That's
Probably,
correct.
likely. So it is possible to walk and chew gum at the same time on many issues in the U.S. Congress. All right, good. Well, then we're in an appropriate place to talk about these issues of the parks in New York and the overwhelming effect this is going to have upon them, and we sympathize and we thank those folks here today for traveling and being with us on this. I'll just dive into a couple questions here for Assemblywoman Williams and Councilmember Ariola. You may be aware of the New York Restoration Project, as it's called. I've been made aware of it, so I'm certain you are. Of course, it maintains community gardens and parks in the city. In 2019, the project has published a study which observed that the increase in park and general green space in the East Harlem neighborhood of New York resulted in over 200 fewer felonies committed per year, a reduction of over 50%. So with the lease signed by the Department of Interior, a substantial amount of recreational space will be taken away. So can you speak to the fact that housing these illegal immigrants on Floyd Bennett Field will have on the local area in the loss of recreation and increased crime possibilities, not only from the neighborhood having less park, when we've seen the crime of the neighborhood itself go down, but the crime that will be generated from these camps?
Yes, thank you. So we have a number of groups that go to Floyd Bennett Field regularly. We have the Jamaica Bay Rockaway Park Conservancy, which was made to postpone their Public Arts Festival. They also have a new project that we've all been working with an EIS, with the community, and for outreach for the betterment of Floyd Bennett Field. There are bird clubs, there are people who fish there, there are people who kayak there, there are people who have archery there, there is Aviator Sports Center.
I'm sorry, but please focus on the crime aspect of what you would expect.
So if you have two police officers from MPS on any given tour, and a depleted police force from the 6th and the 100th precinct who would have oversight there, then absolutely it would be a crime issue.
Because of the camp itself, as well as now less park space that has been instrumental in lowering crime in the neighborhood, as statistically shown, right?
Right, and because there would be upwards of 2,000 to 7,500 people living on that park space.
Yeah.
And that really is a community. That's a community that deserves its own precinct, school board, and fire department. And they wouldn't have that.
Thank you very much. As we've stated, Floyd Bennett Field is unsafe for anyone to be living here. You talk about crime, you just heard from Mrs. Spencer. Oh my goodness, I've did it again. So again, we're saying that Floyd Bennett Field is unsafe and unsuitable for anyone to live. You talk about the crime. I think Mr. Spencer shared that the burden that this will have on his force, having just 2 officers there. We're looking at 2,000 plus single migrant men. I don't have, I can't tell the future. I don't have a crystal ball in front of me to say what crime is going to be committed from what is not going to be committed,
Sure.
but we
Okay.
have to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Mr. Spencer, would you weigh in on that, please? Because what I'm wondering too is that has the Interior, Department of Justice, Homeland Security, have they offered any kind of help to pay for the employees that it's going to take to do this job, if indeed you could get more than 2?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. No, from everything I know, we have not been given any funding to supplement outside of normal operations on Floyd Bennett Field.
As the Park Police, what is the interface between them and New York Police Department for dealing with the crime that's expected?
I do know that NYPD is also severely understaffed, just as we are. They do work hand in hand with us on law enforcement functions, but primarily we are the servicing law enforcement agency for Floyd Bennett Field.
So it's a real recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It's going to overwhelm us.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thanks for allowing me to sit in here and for a second round of questions today. Appreciate it. So, Ms. Griswold, again, thank you for your appearance and for the coordination we've been able to have with FEMA in Northern California after the many disasters. So, in recovery from wildfires in my own district, we've had a lot of great strides. but some bureaucratic challenges, not necessarily in your department, have delayed progress and really true recovery so that victims can get back to normal. So just removing hazardous trees or to build housing, fix a road, the local jurisdiction must do a NEPA. Every project within the recovery process has a separate NEPA requirement, which can take a year to produce, and oftentimes for things that are very basic. You wouldn't need a full-blown NEPA for changing a culvert or repairing especially already existing infrastructure. So not much has changed on the process of how NEPAs are done. So my constituents continue to say, hey, this is such a pain for them. It really does take more time, and sometimes opportunities as grant dollars run out and permits, other types of permits may expire. So, or more conditions keep getting added on. So it would be, I believe, and many folks have weighed in with me, that couldn't we have one big regional NEPA after, in this case, a wildfire, for the whole burn scar, and have that applicable for all recovery and mitigation projects tied to a disaster that was declared by the president? Wouldn't that seem like a common sense way of doing it? Just having an area-wide, in this case, burn scar-wide NEPA, and do it as a catch-all instead of so much duplication like this zone, this project. Is that something we could strive for, do you believe?
There are a number of policies out there when we're doing our environmental and historic reviews, and NEPA is certainly one of those that are out there. There are tools in our toolbox that can do programmatic reviews, but again, each instance is very different. We would have to work with each jurisdiction to better understand how we can apply broader application of our tools, which we have done in some areas, but we can't do it in every area because they're all so specific. And so I can't give you a general answer, but happy to continue to work with you on ways that we can streamline this process, because we also recognize it's one of those pieces of this recovery and rebuilding effort that has some of the longer timelines associated with it.
Well, thank you. Indeed, in the Paradise area, the campfire, we're going to be 5 years in November, and we're still chasing permits to remove hazardous trees. These are dead trees that are, not going to be part of the landscape or a positive part. Maybe a handful for woodpeckers, but not to the extent there's acres and acres. And this is still keeps just a dark cloud over recovery, over building, and indeed getting insurance again for the area. The insurance companies are pulling out of California and pulling out of areas like this, even though what you would really look at, the risk has changed completely after that, such a devastating fire, such a complete fire. Once these trees are removed, it'll be a much more insurable area for folks. And you have folks, one lady, one anecdote, and I'll stop. A lady and her, I think, 2 kids were when they're in their home, and during a wind event, trees were falling over, dead trees, and you could hear them cracking that haven't fallen yet. She finally decided she was gonna have to get her family out of her home because she was within reach of some of the trees, and go take a hotel down the hill in the town of Chico rather than stay in her home, because we keep hanging on with an inability to quickly and efficiently remove the hazardous trees that still exist there. So we don't need to NEPA to death every little project. Indeed, a coordination of projects into one. The darn NEPA doesn't teach you that much anyway. I don't know if they even read the thing, at the end of the day. Is it gonna affect a yellow-toed salamander or what have you? The work is gonna get done. It needs to get done. It's just a lot more pain. So if you could, we need help on that Lake Madrone thing, as we mentioned a while ago. And if in your conversations with the regulators on this, please emphasize that a broader approach, a burn scar approach, would be very helpful for everybody, I'm sure for your department and for the people that are actually victims. So thank you for that, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, a year and a half ago, Rida Gaines bravely spoke out when she was forced to compete against a biological male, Leah Thomas, at the 2022 NCAA Swimming Championships. Well, guess what? It's still an issue. Riley and Leah at the time tied for 5th place in the 200-yard freestyle after Leah had won the 500 freestyle the previous night. On the podium, the NCAA handed Leah the 5th place trophy for the tie that Leah and Riley were with, and gave Riley the 6th place trophy, telling Riley she'd received her correct trophy in the mail later, not even deciding by a coin flip or some other tiebreaker. I remember hearing this story and being completely appalled. I was sympathetic for Riley and the heartbreak and disrespect she and all the other women and girls who worked their whole lives to compete at the highest level in collegiate swimming or even in high school and lower levels. I also remember hearing calls and rebuttals from those who sympathize with Leah Thomas and transgender kids across the country. They said kids like, well, just let Leah compete. She deserves it. Transgender kids have high rates of suicide. Let them play sports and they will be happy. Or it's not happening often. Don't worry about it. Or this is just a one-time thing. Or even this won't open the floodgates. Unfortunately, this is not a one-time thing. This is happening often, and the floodgates have been opened at all age ranges. In the last year and a half, we have seen countless stories of opportunities being taken away from young women by biological males competing in their sports, whether it's being bumped from 1st place to 2nd place or top 2 are males in running events, where the girls are losing out on Olympic spots, endorsement deals, college scholarships, or even whether they're just going to make the varsity team or not. All these tragedies for women and girls in sports and deserves outrage from all Americans. In addition, the left has silenced young women who have stated that the young women feel uncomfortable sharing locker rooms with biological males. Instead, for the case of Leah Thomas's teammates, these young women have been outrageously, get this, told to get counseling. Now, just a few years ago, we had the Me Too movement in which we were told to believe all women. Yet a few years later, now we are being told not to believe women or even see what their feelings and thoughts are, but rather to believe the biological male who believes he's a woman. So speaking of believe all women, last week up in Canada, a 50-year-old biological male was allowed to participate in a swim meet with 13 to 14-year-old girls because he identified as a 13-year-old girl. You cannot make this stuff up. So this 50-year-old man was able to use the girls' locker room to change with underage young women. I cannot express how angry this makes me and many sensible Americans and Canadians. Where are the adults in the room? How could any responsible adults allow this to happen? To just blindly stand by and say, oh, this is no big deal. The safety, the fair competition, and the happiness of these young girls should be prioritized over this deranged 50-year-old man who somehow believes he has a right to violate everyone else's rights for his pathetic interest in competing against girls. We see this in other sports as well, in the ring fighting and others where a biological male can actually do very devastating damage to a woman. So what can we do about all this? Well, in the House, we passed H.R. 734, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, back in April. It passed, unfortunately, on a party line vote. Sadly, not one Democrat could find the way to support and vote in keeping girls' sports for biological females. I'm proud of the Republican conference for making the safety, privacy, and opportunity of women and girls in sports, and in general, a top priority. I strongly urge my colleagues in the Senate to bring this bill up for a vote, to put your name on the line as what you think about the sanctity of women's sports and women's and girls' place in society in general. In addition, many state legislatures have since passed bills to protect women's sports in their state. Some of their governors even felt that the need to pass a bill entitled the Women's Bill of Rights, which defines the word woman because of increasing numbers of challenges to what the word man and woman mean. Unfortunately, this is necessary because it doesn't codify the definition of sex-based terms, laws that prohibit sex discrimination don't mean anything. It's amazing that the media figure Matt Walsh has a film titled What is a Woman? That many on the left cannot even answer the question. Or they give such just contorted answers in their non-answer that it's just pathetic. Even a Supreme Court justice nominee had
Gentleman's
to
time has
avoid
expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms.
Lord
Miller
help
Meeks,
us.
for 5 minutes.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to point out that, once again, our water situation in California is extremely important to the whole country for our food supply. These products you see here, many crops that are grown in California supply 90 to 99% of what Americans consume. Otherwise, they would be imported. So why is that important? Because if our water supply in California isn't allowed to go to agriculture, instead more and more environmental water, more and more water just allowed to flow down the streams without being captured in water storage, we don't get these crops. We don't have an economy, and the land turns into something much less productive. So what we need is to continue to focus on saving water in California and allowing it to flow to agriculture. More water storage projects and updating the 1960s, 1970s manuals that guide how government saves water. Yes, we had an amazing amount of water last year, but still, 2 of our large reservoirs only reached 50% and 80% full, even with all that. And so water management is extremely important when we manage it for people. I yield back.
For what purpose is the gentleman from...
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Congress is considering a transportation appropriations bill right now as we speak. It's critical that with California's failed high-speed rail project that has sought money year after year after year from the federal level, that we don't give it another dime. Indeed, this document does not provide any new money for the high-speed rail project, but they're certainly seeking it. There's reportedly proposals for $3 billion requested by Governor Newsom, and even reported asks of a possible $28 billion is what they really seek. Interestingly, because this original project, let's go back in history just a little bit. In 2008, a proposition was passed on California's ballot with the idea that let's build a high-speed rail system from San Francisco to LA. The cost, the voters were told, $33 billion, okay? It would have to be a high-speed rail that would go from the 2 cities at approximately 220 miles an hour and get the job done in approximately 3 hours or less. So it's fallen far short of those goals, and they only have to have 1 high-speed train a day go in order to be eligible to be called a high-speed train. Otherwise, it's going to be a commuter line stopping in every little burg along the way. As it's turning out, from San Francisco to San Jose, it looks like they're going to use local electric rail, and so you have to jump on a train in San Jose that then take it down to an undetermined point in Southern California, and perhaps jump on another train there. As I mentioned, and we were talking about this last night in the debate, you could take a Southwest Airlines plane and already be on the beach and have half of a sunburn before you can get off the high-speed rail at that point. So what is the cost these days? That's the interesting part. $33 billion is what they're sold in 2008. A year later, they adjusted the price up to $42 billion. And not long after that, when I was still in the state legislature, they actually admitted the price then would be $97 billion. Today's estimates show it to be $128 billion. How much have they had, how much construction is finished on it? Well, the voters were told in 2008 it'd be ready to go by 2020. Well, it's 2023, and not a single mile of track has been laid. Some of the infrastructure, they have some bridges and aqueducts already built around Fresno and such, but it's nowhere near being completed. They're trying to do it in segments, so they're doing the Central Valley segment because, as they said at the time, this is pretty funny, they can build it in the Central Valley, there's less people there, so there's less resistance to having it built, okay? So they're gonna do a segment from Merced to Bakersfield where it ends up in an orchard somewhere as the terminus. So at that point, we're finding they need $28 billion just to complete that segment, not the entire thing. So it's been a boondoggle from the beginning. Lies, basically, from the rail authority about what's going to happen with the timeline, the environmental work, and the amount of jobs. Here's another good one. They were promising there'd be 1 million jobs for California. Well, 3 years into the project, they finally admitted that'd be 1 million job years. Well, currently they claim 5,000 people are working on the rail. And so at that rate, for 1 million job years at 5,000 people, that would take 200 years. 200 years to complete this system. Well, the people that voted on it would probably like to see it done in their lifetime, which may not even happen. I think at this point, why don't we just cut our losses and move towards something that is useful, not just for Californians, but for all Americans. Indeed, we want to do infrastructure around here. Why don't we do true infrastructure? You know, we talk about highways, we talk about a lot of things. I'm focused a lot on California's water situation. We have several projects to add to its water supply so we can continue to grow crops and people can thrive in our state. Not just environmental water, it gets shifted more and more towards fish water and running it out the delta that doesn't actually help that situation or do anything environmentally positively anyway. So instead of more money into the pit, keep coming to Washington, D.C., to do something that's only covering this little portion of California, instead of San Francisco all the way to L.A., they don't even have the route planned out. They don't even know how they're going to get the last leap from Bakersfield into Southern California. Are they going to build a tunnel through there with all that seismic activity? Are they going to go around it? Are they going to go over it? They don't know yet. They don't even have the whole plan this many years into the project. And they still want more money from Washington, D.C., from all federal taxpayers. I propose instead, why don't we shift money into other infrastructure that can help all Americans? These crops you see that are grown in California, look at these numbers, 100% basically of walnuts, tomatoes grown commercially, grown in California. Many of these other crops, 90+% grown in California. That's what benefits Americans, is having a stable food supply. So dollars invested into our water system in California would go much farther than wasting money on high-cost rail. I yield back.
Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. And for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In only 3 years, President Biden's failed foreign policies have caused chaos around the globe. Middle East, Biden failed to enforce congressionally enacted sanctions while opening up new lines of cash for Iran to fund terror. Now Israel's under attack from Iran-backed terrorist proxies. In Europe, Biden lifted sanctions on Putin's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a move that he was warned was a calamitous foreign policy disaster, while simultaneously undermining American energy production, weakening our influence and empowering maligned producers of energy like Russia. In Afghanistan, Biden's chaotic troop withdrawal left Americans dead, the Afghan government to collapse, and stranded tens of thousands of Afghan allies. In Asia, Biden continues to ignore a growing number of aggressive provocations from the Chinese Communist Party. He gave the CCP a pass on their COVID obstruction, let their spy balloon gather intelligence from sensitive military sites, promoted the use of the CCP spyware app called TikTok, and standing idly by as China reportedly sets up a spy base in Cuba. In North America, cartels are exploiting Biden's open borders agenda to poison tens of thousands of Americans with deadly fentanyl, while experts warn of the ever-growing terror as 1.6 million getaways have escaped into the country on Biden's watch. This foreign policy agenda has been a failure on every front, and the entire world is less safe from it. I yield back.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess we need to remind the Biden administration that there is a gigantic problem in the Middle East, most of it caused by Iran, the major sponsor of terror in the world. In Yemen, threatening our Saudi friends, and of course, all around Israel. So what's the remedy? Oh, a few weeks ago, it was to unfreeze $6 billion worth of Iranian assets in order to help them fund whatever activity, which is probably going to be terror. So what is the Biden administration considering now? Another $10 billion of unfreezing assets to allow them to continue this battle. You have to ask the question, whose side are they on? It makes absolutely no sense to give them more material, more assets, more ability for them to make war against our ally at a time when we're contemplating sending significant resources, as we should, to our ally in Israel. Yet we can't get out of our tracks around here enough to do so. Mr. Speaker, they need to think much harder about what they do with Iran and allowing them to be a sponsor of terror. I yield back.